Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. I got World War III alert. We got a World War III alert. Trump about to make a terrible mistake. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we got to pay attention to the distractions of Charlie Kirk and other foolishness. Epstein files cannot make us miss our mark on what Trump and the imperialists was dragging us into, and that's World War III. Let's get into it.
Venezuela as well.
Gentlemen.
So really, we've got multiple. What's up, guys? D7 back at you guys again. It looks like we've got some military action lined up here. We have about a dozen strata tankers making moves, heading toward England. And the last time that this happened was right before we struck Iran, when it hit their nuclear stuff, so to speak.
Revolutionary solution.
And it looks like something huge is about to happen, sending all these refueling tankers in that direction. So where they're going, what theater of war can be speculated. Is it going to be a new one? Is it going to be something to do with Ukraine? Something else?
And now I think that these mass shootings, we have 4 in 24 hours. Now I see it as acts of political violence, not with any reason other than to terrify Americans and to let our political, it's all part, Charlie Kirk, it's the small, letting our leaders know to do everything they say, or it's going to be a campaign of terror throughout America. That's a fact.
We've got all this talk of Moldova and the other countries now surrounding the western side of Ukraine being brought up. And it looks like they're making a move here. We know that they're staged all across the Caribbean and ready to make moves on Venezuela as well. So really, we've got multiple different fronts here that could see action at any moment.
Can't take no Venezuela without it going real bad for them. Venezuela got advanced weapons. The U.S. ain't never fought nobody with no fucking advanced weapons. It's not gonna go good for them. But they're looking like they're gonna try something against Russia, and that's just gonna be all kind of bad news. All these air tankers that he's saying is flying to Europe. You don't need to fly your air tankers, which is refueling tankers, which means you plan a large air campaign in Europe. That don't got shit to do with Venezuela.
Moment. Everything is kind of set up, but this move, sending a dozen of them, some could say it may be a military exercise.
Putin could bomb them for that.
If it is a military exercise, most of the time, it's part of something announced, and we know we can relate it to that exercise.
We didn't get to cover it here because we was running our coverage on Charlie Kirk, and I was tied up doing other things. Y'all understand? So we didn't get to run a live on that. The Pete Hegseth, the head of the U.S. military, the Department of Defense, he's our what is he? The Secretary General. I forgot his position. Secretary of State. No, he's not Secretary of State. Secretary of Defense. That's what he is. He called all of our generals from all over the globe. I think they said 300 generals, and y'all who've been paying attention, first time in history, all generals was called back from active military theaters to come to a meeting in one location in America. So that was sending red flags. Russia could strike them for that. China could strike. North Korea could say the time is now. And then you put this in it. They sending large waves of air tankers to Europe. It looks like Trump has finally been cornered, and he's going to make a big mistake.
They're doing exercises like unannounced. Many times, like we've seen in the past, they act like they're going into a drill or something, and they go live with it. Or it's all really going to a theater.
Everything a drill.
Now, you can track this stuff on the ADS-B exchange. You can track all the military movement and stuff there. And you can see kind of what's going on with aircraft like this. You're not going to see, however, like fighter jets that have missiles and weapons attached to them on that website. Just like if the feds are flying around somewhere, you're not going to see them. They stay blacked out and off of these sites because they say it'll put them in danger or whatnot. But I just want you guys to know that a move of this size is very indicative of a massive military strike about to go down. And not only that, people on the ground and other people commenting on this have said that it seems that other military assets are with it, like flying with it. So it's not just the Stratotankers. They're saying that visually, people have seen other jets, other military assets en route as well, even though we can't track it on the site. But we do know a dozen or more at this point heading in that direction, on the move, and we've just got multiple fronts here where stuff can pop off. So be on the lookout for more activity out of this. I really feel as soon as these strikes start with the cartels, they're not going to stop. It's going to be intense. It's going to pick up quick. And if you missed it, Rubio did come out and just kind of slid it out there. And he said, yeah, regime change is the goal in Venezuela. So, like, anything can happen on these fronts. Join me for the live streams going live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Ritter's Rant. Today's word of the day is insanity, or we can use a form of the word insane. And this needs to be applied to anybody who honestly believes that Donald Trump is going to provide the Ukrainian government with Tomahawk cruise missiles. I mean, this is the big story right now. We have Keith Kellogg out there saying, yes, this is going to happen. He, of course, is Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine. You know, Keith Kellogg, the guy that went to Ukraine on Ukrainian Independence Day and was awarded with, one of Ukraine's top orders. A man who is totally in the pocket of Ukraine, doesn't think, in realistic manner about the Ukrainian conflict. His job is simply to promote more war for Ukraine. Probably because his daughter makes a lot of money off this war, but that's another issue altogether. Kellogg thinks this is going to happen. J.D. Vance is implied, according to Keith Kellogg, that this is going to happen, but that's not what J.D. Vance said. What J.D. Vance said is that the Ukrainian government has made a number of requests to the United States, to President Trump, including Tomahawks, and that Trump will consider all of these requests. That doesn't mean that we're going to make it happen. Ladies and gentlemen, let me make it clear. The Tomahawk missile is an intermediate range, nuclear capable missile. It has strategic capabilities, and the United States simply will not provide Ukraine, a nation that is in active armed conflicts against Russia, a nuclear armed nation, with American-made strategic nuclear capable systems.
See, if America give Ukraine anything like that, anything, do you think Russia won't give Venezuela the same? They playing a very dangerous game right now. Putin already said that. He said it a long time ago he was going to mirror their actions if they kept doing this. That's why I know for sure right now Venezuela have all kind of advanced weapons from Russia, China, but that's not the point. Now you're talking about giving Ukraine nuclear capable. Maybe it's nukes, maybe it's not. Russia has those type of missiles too that they can get to Venezuela. That maybe it's a nuke on it, maybe it's not.
It's insanity to think that this could possibly happen. First of all, this is inherently destabilizing. It's a total violation of the missile technology control regime. It would be one of the most gross violations of ballistic missile proliferation imaginable. It would be destabilizing regionally and globally, and with 100% certainty, and I'll make this statement one more time, with 100% certainty, it would lead to a nuclear war between Russia and the United States, because Russia simply can't allow the United States to provide an intermediate range missile capable of striking Moscow with nuclear weapons to Ukraine, a nation that is, as I said before, actively engaged in armed conflict and has shown a a suicidal tendency to seek to escalate a conflict that it is losing in every way, shape, or form. The Tomahawk uses three kinds of guidance systems: a terrain following guidance system, Terracom. It uses GPS guidance system, and then it uses this close-in mapping guidance system that allows for last-minute adjustments to the target. Ukraine has no ability to target a Tomahawk system independently, which means that the targeting would be done by the United States. That means that the United States would be targeting Russia. Again, let me point this out to you so it's very clear. The United States would be targeting Russia, so it could be struck with American Tomahawk missiles that are nuclear capable, but apparently the trigger would be pushed by the Ukrainians, although the trigger couldn't be pushed by the Ukrainians because the system itself can't be fired without access to highly classified technologies that only the United States or its closest allies, and Ukraine is not a close ally of the United States, possess. For instance, the British possess this capability. They fire the Tomahawk on occasion, but Ukraine doesn't and never will, and therefore Ukraine will never have these weapons. This is just part of the overall I think the misreading of the situation by much of the world today. You see, people looked at President Trump meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump saying, "Hey, go ahead and you go right ahead and take back your borders in 1991. Hey, and while you're at it, why not just march on Moscow? You guys got this." And Zelensky was smiling ear to ear, saying, "This is great. The president's doing. He's on our side." But then the president said, "But all we're going to do is allow NATO to buy weapons from us. We're not giving weapons to NATO. We're not giving any weapons to Ukraine. NATO can buy weapons from us, and then NATO can decide what they want to do with those weapons, whether they want to sell them to Ukraine or not." Left unsaid was the fact that the United States has placed replenishing American stockpiles above everybody else. So even if NATO buys a weapon, they're not getting it for 2 or 3 years, which means Ukraine won't be getting it for 2 or 3 years, which means there won't be Ukraine by the time Ukraine wants to get it in 2 or 3 years. And the realization is sunk home that Donald Trump has washed his hands of Ukraine, that Donald Trump is finished underwriting the Ukraine conflict. None other than Clay Callas, the head of the foreign ministry or the foreign ministry equivalent of Europe, recognizes, where she says Trump has effectively abandoned Ukraine and left the Ukrainian problem to Europe and Europe alone, and Europe doesn't have the resources to take care of this problem. So for all the people out there thinking this war is going in one direction, understand it's not. It's going in the complete opposite direction. Nothing good will happen to Ukraine because of this war. Only disaster, only the termination of Ukraine, only more dead Ukrainians, only the destruction of a nation state, all because of insanity, like thinking Ukraine was going to be given American-made Tomahawk missiles to begin with. Well, that's my rant. The next time a thought crosses my mind, I'll be sure to let you know. Thanks.
Kellogg and the choices faced.
Tell them your friend the judge sent you.
Scott Ritter, welcome here, my dear friend. Before we get to the latest nonsense from General Kellogg and the choices facing President Trump, a few other questions. Should Benjamin Netanyahu, who did not look very happy at a press conference just that concluded a few minutes ago with the President Trump in the White House, be concerned over Israel's rapidly diminishing support in the United States?
I think he is concerned about Israel's collapsing support amongst, what was the foundational, component of this pro-Israeli lobby, which is evangelical Christian Zionists. Everybody speaks of AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, and various, pro-Israeli American Jewish congresses or gatherings. But the heart and soul of what makes the Zionist lobby viable in America is the iron grip hold it had on American Christian evangelicals. We heard it with Ted Cruz when he said, "I joined the Senate to serve Israel." My God, an American senator making that statement in public. But many of our elected officials do, who come from communities where their constituents are comprised in large part of these Christian
I just have to
evangelicals.
jump in. I forget the congressman's name, and this has outraged you and all of our guests who are retired military. He wears
Brian
right. Congressman Mast wears an IDF uniform on the floor of the House of Representatives. How can that be lawful?
No, well, I mean, first of all, this is a man who served America. He was an explosive ordnance disposal soldier in the United States Army, working with special forces units. He lost both legs in an explosion in Afghanistan. But then he came back, and instead of focusing on Veterans Affairs and doing better for America, he went off and spent a year working for the Israeli Defense Force, and that's been his priority ever since. This is the warped sense of priorities that seems now to be coming home. The chickens are coming home to roost. Because the American people are waking up to the fact that we have foregone our significant aspects of our sovereignty on behalf of a foreign power. When there are problems to be resolved here at home, things that need to happen to make America first. And much of the MAGA base that was dual-hatted, people who would say, America first, but we support Israel, are waking up to the fact that America's second. And Israel is first, and they can't square that. And now they're starting to walk away, especially when confronted with the horrific crimes taking place by Israel in Gaza on a daily basis. You can only, people can only hear so many times, there is no genocide, there is no crime. Don't worry about it. When you turn on the TV, when you turn on the news, when you turn on the internet and you see it, even your brain, which has been brainwashed, realizes there is something bad happening here that we don't want to be a part of. And the American people are starting to walk. And Benjamin Netanyahu recognizes this. And he recognizes the reality that if he loses the American Christian evangelicals, the Christian Zionists, it's all over for Israel. It's all she wrote, because the pro-Israeli Jewish part of the American population can't sustain Israel by itself. They don't have the political clout. It's the Christian Zionists to give the pro-Zionist movement the political clout that allow them to capture the Ted Cruzes, the Brian Masts, and others. And once they lose them, it's over for Israel. And Netanyahu is very afraid.
Wow. And hence his continued and persistent denials that the Israeli forces had anything to do with the murder of Charlie Kirk.
But I mean, it's the funniest thing in the world to say. And I don't mean that funny because the murder of anybody's not funny. But, you've heard the saying, thou doth protest too loudly.
Right. Right.
And if you didn't have
before this kid Robinson was caught, before they knew who the trigger man was, Netanyahu was on national television denying it.
Saying, I didn't do it. And it's not because I believe he did do it. There's no evidence to sustain that. But it just shows how nervous he is of the potential of being accused of doing it, because perception creates its own reality. And if the perception of the Christian evangelical movement that was the core of Charlie Kirk's base, if the perception is that Israel had something to do with this and they start to walk away from Israel, it's over for Netanyahu. So he's out there saying, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. And it just makes him even look more guilty in the eyes of those who are already inclined to believe that he is guilty.
Last Friday, President Trump said he's not going to allow Netanyahu, he's not going to allow the Israelis to annex the West Bank. And he repeated it, as he often does when he wants to make a strong statement. Haven't they effectively annexed the West Bank already with all of the land theft that goes on there while the Israeli military and police look the other way?
They have taken a significant part of the West Bank over the years, and they're doing it now as we speak. And so for the president to make these words without backing them up, it's just another empty threat made by a president who has made nothing but empty threats when it comes to Israel. If you want to back this threat up, Mr. President, the answer is easy. Make it illegal to seize lands and retroactively apply this law to anybody who has seized lands in the West Bank. Now, if they're Israelis, they have nothing to fear. But if they're Brooklyn Jews who have flown to Israel for the sole purpose of stealing Palestinian lands. These are people who are in Israel. I just want to remind your audience, they get paid salaries. They effectively don't work. We pay their salary. We pay their health care. We pay everything, their education. They live, they steal land, that they live off the benevolence of the American taxpayer who pays for all of this, make what they do criminal, and tell them that there is an arrest warrant for them. And if they ever return to the United States, they will be arrested on the spot and prosecuted for theft. That's one way you back up your words, Mr. President. If you truly want to ban the annexation of the West Bank, then make it impossible for American citizens to travel to Israel and carry out the theft that constitutes the core aspect of this annexation.
Do you have any grasp on what Trump is about to propose that involves making former British Prime Minister Tony Blair the Governor General, the overlord of Palestine, of the Gaza Strip?
This is, what he's trying to do.
The only person I can think of who will be less appealable to the Palestinians might be Dick Cheney. I mean, Tony Blair?
Tony Blair is a sellout. He has no legitimacy amongst anybody who knows anything about the Middle East. But he is somebody who has sold his soul to the Zionist devil, and therefore he is acceptable to the global Zionist movement as the face of the West when it comes to, a so-called impartial arbiter of the future of Gaza and of Palestine. This is the grand bargain that Trump's been trying to put together. The problem with it is not just Tony Blair, though. The problem is Hamas. The problem is the Palestinian people, because it, in effect, disenfranchises the only political party that has the support of the Palestinian people in any significant way. If there was an election today, if Tony Blair ran against the head of Hamas as the head of the Palestinian state, Blair wouldn't get a vote. Hamas will beat anybody. They'll beat the current president, Mahmoud Abbas, who is nothing but a shill, a sellout of the Palestinian cause to Israel. There is no political competitor to Hamas, and yet you're looking for what's called a political solution, and you seek to disenfranchise Hamas. This is, the Achilles heel, so to speak, of this plan, because what do you do with Hamas? He says that they have to go where? Who's going to take them now that you've made them, in effect, illegal? The Arab states that have never been there for Hamas, now that Hamas has been disenfranchised, will take them in. This is why this plan has no chance. There's a snowball's chance in hell of succeeding.
Chris, I want you to play the SOT number 2, the shorter version of it. Now, this is General Kellogg basically saying, the president won the electoral college, and we're in the military. We do whatever he tells us to do. I'm going to ask you what members of the military should do when he tells them to murder people on a speedboat on the high seas. But there's no question what General Kellogg says he would do. Chris?
He's the commander-in-chief by the Constitution, and everybody falls in line. When the president says go left, you go left. If he says you go right, you go right. That's the president. The last I checked, none of us got electoral college votes. He did. So when the president says to do something, we just need to to do that and complete the action. Sometimes I think we don't realize how serious this is. And my biggest concern is that a mistake can happen, and that causes for a larger escalation, be it the attacks by the drones into Poland or the aircraft that are overflying Estonia, whatever it's going to be. You have to be very, very careful about it. So this is just not only a European issue. This is a global issue, and I think sometimes we forget that.
Before we get into the European issue, and we have another cut from him, and I want you to explain Tomahawk missiles. What should troops have done when they knew they were ordered to commit murder by blowing up a speedboat on the high seas?
Well, here's the difficult part of this. If I have received an order from my lawful command to execute lethal action, and I've been told by my lawful command that it is confirmed that the people in that boat are narco-terrorists who mean to bring harm to the United States, and that the appropriate legal authorities have reviewed this, and this is a legitimate target, I don't get to second guess that because I've been given the conditions under which it is construed that this is a lawful order. So I open fire and I will kill them. And if I refuse to do so, that's a problem for me, because we can't have a situation where every trigger puller is suddenly a constitutional scholar. Now, if I was told the people in that boat could be innocent tuna fishers, tuna fishermen, and we don't know for sure, then I have a duty and responsibility to say, whoop, stop. No, I can't pull the trigger on this one. We have to go in and investigate. We need confirmation. There are things that have to happen before we can apply lethal force. But if I've been told by competent authority, whom I have to believe are giving me lawfully construed orders, I have to execute those orders. And so, yes, if the president says turn right and there's nothing that leaps out that says that's unconstitutional, I have to turn right. I have to obey my lawful orders. So this is an issue that needs to go up to the top to where this generated from. And what we need to find out is, who is the one who made the decision to gloss over, the component that allows lethal force to be done? Who's the one that said, oh, no, these aren't tuna fishermen, these are this, and what was the basis of that? Those are the people that committed the war crime, not the trigger pullers.
We are still awaiting the DOJ's memo on legal authority, and nothing has come out after a month. They don't have one. The Hegseth just did what the president told them to do. The general counsel to the Defense Department didn't produce one, and the DOJ didn't produce one.
And this is problematic for Pete Hegseth, for President Trump, and for everybody involved in that senior chain of command. This is extremely problematic because we're no longer talking about, politically motivated theory of war crimes. We are talking about actual war crimes being committed. That if they made this decision for political reasons, that we need to be seen as being tough, therefore we're going to arbitrarily pick this boat and kill it, claiming it's narco traffickers, even though we don't have the evidence to back it up, or we might have evidence that actually proves it's not narco traffickers, then you committed murder.
We're going to play another clip also of General Kellogg from yesterday. I'd like you to explain, if he knows what he's talking about, with respect to the Tomahawk missiles. The questioner says, is it the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, and that has been authorized by the president? Watch his waffling answer to help himself get to yes. Chris, cut number one.
Are you saying, though, that it is the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, that has been authorized by the president?
I think reading what he has said and reading what Vice President Vance has said, as well as Secretary Rubio, the answer is yes. Use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuaries. That's one of the reasons I believe that this last week, and it has been confirmed, that President Zelensky asked President Trump to get Tomahawk missiles, which give you a depth. They're really good systems. America makes the best systems in the world.
Are we giving him the Tomahawks?
Well, that decision has not been made, but he's asked. I know that President Zelensky did, in fact, ask for them, which was confirmed by a social media post by Vice President Vance. That's going to be up to the president to do it.
Okay, so we'll start with the likely consequences. If we had these Tomahawk missiles tomorrow and the Ukrainians got them on Wednesday and fired them at Moscow on Thursday, what would happen?
We'd all be dead by Friday, because it would trigger an immediate Russian nuclear response that would then ping pong out of control, and we'd have a general nuclear exchange, and the entire world would be annihilated. The Tomahawk missile is a intermediate range nuclear capable missile with strategic importance attached to it. Just so people know, the ground launch version of the Tomahawk, which is what we're talking about giving the Ukrainians, was banned by the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty back in 1987-88. Donald Trump withdrew from that treaty in 2019, and we've been deploying that missile ever since, or has the potential to deploy it. It is an American strategic system, especially when it has a nuclear missile, a nuclear warhead attached. It does have conventional capabilities, but those are capabilities that cannot be transferred to third parties. When we launch a cruise missile, because the United States of America decided to launch a cruise missile, or we gave a green light to our British allies who possess a handful of them to launch cruise missiles. But this is not a system that's just handed out like candy. there's a number of reasons why. One, first of all, the missile technology control regime would prohibit it. So the president would have a whole bunch of issues about missile proliferation. It would also undercut everything the United States is trying to achieve when it comes to North Korea and Iran. If we start handing out Tomahawks, then we have no moral authority or legal authority now to confront Iran or North Korea, and this would undermine our position. The State Department would have huge problems with this. But the biggest thing is the Tomahawk missile cannot be operated without American hands operating it. This isn't giving it to Ukraine, and Ukraine suddenly is able to launch this missile. First of all, the guidance system, there's three aspects of it. There's GPS, that's encrypted American.
See, Putin already warned them. All that giving Ukraine them top of the line missile systems, knowing they don't have access to the codes, y'all won't give it to them. So the U.S. really gonna be attacking Russia, acting like it's Ukraine. Putin warned them. Don't try that. So any Tomahawk missiles come towards Russia, it's gonna be the end of the U.S.
American military grade GPS. There's TERRACOM, terrain following radar images that only we have. And then the final adjustments that are made, basically we take satellite photos of the target and we use real-time imagery from the system itself to align and zoom in. We control everything there. So if a Tomahawk missile hits a Russian target, it's because the American intelligence personnel prepared the targeting deck to that. And the Tomahawk can't be fired without certain things going through certain classified communications channels that can only be handled by Americans. So let me make it clear to Keith Kellogg and everybody listening. The United States will never, ever provide Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. We know that. Russia knows that. Ukraine knows that. It's stupid for Keith Kellogg to put but this is part of the stupid game that he's playing. You see, his job right now is to create the perception that Ukraine is able to continue this fight, to sustain this fight, and to extend this fight into Russia. The goal here is to pressure Russia into having a trilateral meeting between the president of Russia, the president of the United States, and the president of Ukraine, something the Russians have said we're not doing. J.D. Vance lamented that fact. He said the Russians just refused to have this trilateral meeting. So this is all part of a game being played to put pressure on Russia to have such a meeting. Ukraine will never receive a Tomahawk missile because Donald Trump knows that if they do, the world ends. And Donald Trump's not in the world-ending business at this point in time.
What troubles
Donald Trump not in the world-ending business, but the small heads are, and they controlling him right now. They pressure him right now. And they also have activated military-grade mass shooters all over this country. Don't let that slip by you that all of these dudes have mental health issues. You know where they went? They went to the government to see a doctor. And guess what that doctor gave these dudes? Medicine. You see? Medicine. Some of these medicine got time capsules on them. Well, once they take them, hey, over a certain time, they lose their goddamn mind and be ready to be a shooter and get activated by these Zionists. That's just a fact, bro. These people not playing games. And it is the small hats who got these mass shooters all over the country doing all, and they got to make it look like left versus right. The government know what's going on. The CIA know what's going on. And it's all pressure.
Me is that people like Kellogg, General Kellogg, you could add, this person might be worse, Scotty. Sebastian Gorka, Lindsey Graham, they get to whisper this nonsense into Trump's ears. He could pick up the phone and call Hegseth before any rational person speaks to him, and something horrific will be commenced.
In theory, but the again, we just talked about the senior leadership blowing
right, obeying lawful commands, right?
Yeah, so here I am trying to reflect on the Constitution and the law, and we just acknowledge that there's a real potential this administration doesn't give a damn about the law. But there are laws that prevent this from happening. There would have to be congressional action. This is an impeachable offense. I'll tell you right now, if the president ordered Pete Hegseth to transfer Tomahawk technology to Ukraine without getting congressional permission, it is an impeachable offense. Do you remember when Ronald Reagan violated the Boland Amendment and how serious Congress took that?
Yes.
Iran-Contra. This would be
with your fellow Marine, Ollie North.
Yes, there's a reason why many Marines stayed away from Ollie during that time period, because we were like, we don't want to violate the
Go to jail.
Constitution.
Right. How much longer will President Putin's ability to resist the pressure on his right flank and his personal patience last?
The British are playing a very dangerous game because they're the ones who are doing this. It's the British who are involved in every aspect of this. Is the British, information operation, keep Ukraine in the fight. You have to maintain the perception of Ukraine victory. The whole Pokrovsk, north of Pokrovsk counteroffensive, it's collapsing as we speak. It's over. And the Russians will now take everything back. But it was, basically like the jab into Kursk, where they accumulate their best forces, they pick a time and place, and they push forward. Then they surge drones in, and they made life a living hell for the Russians for a period of 3 weeks. The Russians have stabilized the situation, and now they're bringing in overwhelming force to destroy the Ukrainians. This is the reality. But now the Ukrainians are striking deeper and deeper into Russia. And at some point in time, the Russians will lose their patience, their strategic patience. And, there are certain weapon systems that haven't been used against Ukraine, and there's certain, targeting priorities that haven't, reached up. We saw it the other day. The Russians reached out with 2 Kinzhal missiles, which are fired from MiG-31 fighters, and took out a Ukrainian air base, destroying 5 U.S.-provided F-16s, killing a whole bunch of Ukrainian pilots and a whole bunch of Western ground support crews. The Russians have avoided that because the Russians, don't want to provoke NATO into saying, "Oh, you killed a bunch of our people. Now we have no choice but to come in." But the Russians are going to start increasing the targeting categories that bring pain to NATO, including the United States. And then they will also add to the mix weapon systems. We've seen the Eurasian once. I'm fairly comfortable saying that before this year is over, the Eurasian will be used in a decisive fashion against Ukraine, and it will not end well for Zelensky or his government if they continue to behave in the manner that they are. Russia isn't going to let Ukraine and let the British and let NATO make this an even fight. Russia has the strategic advantage, and they intend on keeping the strategic advantage. And as the West continues to pour resources into Ukraine, Russia will counter with resources of its own.
You say the Ukrainians are firing deep into Russian territory. Are they using American equipment to do so?
Not deep. I mean, no, right now what they're doing is using the German and British provided drones, using American provided intelligence to evade Russian air defense to strike oil targets, in the Russian depth. But the ATACMS missile has not been used at its full potential. And as J.D. Vance has acknowledged, the president hasn't made the decision to give Ukraine permission to do that. The president committed in December of 2024 not to give this permission because he understood that doing so would enable Ukraine to strike targets which could be classified by Russia as being in the strategic interest and therefore triggering Russia's nuclear doctrine, meaning Russia would have, at least doctrinally, the right to respond using nuclear weapons. The president said he doesn't want to cross that red line. So that line hasn't been crossed yet, and hopefully it never will be.
Do you think Ukrainian senior leadership recognizes that its days are numbered, that it can't possibly win this war no matter what Europeans pay for or American arms manufacturers deliver?
I believe that the Ukrainian senior leadership believes that what they've been told by the British and by the Americans, that if sufficient pressure is brought to bear on Russia, the pain will be so great as to compel Russia to come to the negotiating table, that Ukraine won't get what it wants at the negotiating table. But the fact of the matter is, if Russia comes to the negotiating table under those conditions, Ukraine will continue to exist. And that means exist as a NATO proxy. And it's a poison pill, because if you allow Ukraine to exist as a NATO proxy, ultimately Ukraine will become a NATO member in everything but the word, which is something Russia will never allow to have happen. The Ukrainians don't understand that Russia, when they say never, means never, but they believe that they continue to put pressure on this. As to the sustainability of this, what I would say is follow the money, Judge. Every single one of these senior leaders have taken hundreds of millions of dollars out of the aid pocketed it, and they have bought their retirement homes. They all have villas in Miami, villas in France, apartments in London. And so they will flee in a heartbeat to accounts that have already been padded with American taxpayer largesse. And they'll do that instantaneously. So, they're up there playing games with the Ukrainian people's lives on the line. But when Russia calls the bluff, they're not going to be there to lay their cards down. They'll be gone.
Scott Ritter, thank you, my dear friend. It was a pleasure being with you on Saturday, and thank you very much for your time today. All the best. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Okay, thanks.
On posting a truth search.
Threaten your financial freedom. That's where America's heading. Our growing involvement in global conflicts. It means more spending, more debt, and a weaker dollar. That's a direct hit to your wallet. So here are 3 things to keep your eyes on: exploding debt, declining dollar, rising prices of gold and silver. These things are already happening. Goldman Sachs predicts gold could hit $4,500 an ounce by 2026. Why? Because central banks and smart investors are buying gold hand over fist. They know what's coming and they're hedging against it. Currency collapse, inflation, and market volatility. Gold has been a trusted store of value for thousands of years, and today we need that protection more than ever. Call Lear Capital now at 800-511-4620 or visit LearJudgeNap.com. No one is going to protect your wealth for you. You need to do it yourself, and now is the time.
Colonel McGregor, welcome here, my dear friend. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. Before we get to what you have characterized as war, debt, and delusion, the president's statement at the UN to President Zelensky and in his own posting of Truth Search, I have to ask you a few other questions about what he said at the UN. According to Arab leaders with whom he met after his speech to the General Assembly, he told them that he would prevent President Netanyahu from having the Israelis annex the West Bank. Can he do that? Can he get away with that?
Okay.
There we go.
As president of the United States, the answer is yes, he could profoundly influence that outcome. On the other hand, we haven't seen much evidence that he's behaved like president of the United States. He behaves more like someone implementing guidance and guidelines from Mr. Netanyahu. So to answer that question, we'll have to wait and see.
If I were to ask you if President Trump controls Prime Minister Netanyahu or Prime Minister Netanyahu controls President Trump, I know you don't want this. How could you answer it?
Mr. Netanyahu is in charge. He's been in charge 100% since President Trump took office. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't see any evidence for change in that either in the short term.
Last question before we jump to Ukraine. In the past hour, the Pentagon revealed that Secretary Hegseth has ordered all 800 generals and admirals. My God, I had no idea there were 800 of them. Maybe another topic for another time. I know how you feel about this, and of course, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But all 800 of them around the world to meet him at a Marine base in Virginia next week. What could this be about, and how disruptive to military order would it be if all generals and admirals assembled in one place at one time?
Well, part of me instinctively wants to say that people could actually get a lot of work done that's positive and useful for the American people in the absence of all these flag officers, but I don't want to go there right now. So I'll simply say, I suppose this is going to be at Quantico, because that's the only base I can think of that could accommodate a large number of people like that. And it may have something to do with broader policy regarding where we're headed next. it may have something to do with his wanting to impart a message of what's important to him or the president. You know, he's certainly not going to tell half of them that you're no longer needed and you're fired. I think that's very unlikely. So, but it is unusual. Let's say that.
Okay. Just to jump back on the Trump-Netanyahu relationship, I neglected to run this. Our mutual friend and my former Fox colleague, Tucker Carlson, has spoken very, very directly about this. Here's what he said just 2 or 3 days ago. Chris, number 26.
I mean, Bibi's running around. This is a fact. I'm not guessing about this because I talked to people he said it to, is running around the Middle East, his region, and his own country and telling people point blank, just stating it, I control the United States. I control Donald Trump. He's saying that. And again, I'm not guessing at all. That's a fact. And I dare them to say that's not true because it is true and they know it's true. So I'm an American. How do you think it makes me feel? Even
All right, we cut that to short. He goes on and on and on, and it's a little repetitive. But the point is, he spoke to people who have claimed to have heard Netanyahu saying he's in charge of Trump.
The only comment I can make is that I have sources in various places who've told me the same thing. I'm not sure that's really new. I think most everybody in the region knows that Mr. Netanyahu is in a position to deliver on Trump. In other words, whatever he wants, he's going to get. So that's not really news. I guess it's shocking to the American people, and it should be, but they'd better wake up and figure out who's really running the show. And that's not Donald Trump.
Chris, can we put up the full screen from Truth Social, where the president says it's time for Ukraine to win? I know you've seen this, Colonel, but just so we're on the same page here, the president posted this after he spoke at the UN, then met with President Zelensky. He posted this. I'm reading it. I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win, in caps, all of Ukraine back in its original form. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, now I'm editorializing, 3/4 of whose budget is paid by the US. Now I'm reading again. The original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? How dangerous is this kind of a U-turn from the president of the United States before we even get into death and delusion?
I think Moscow is unsurprised. They're seeing the final transformation of Donald Trump into Biden 2. So for all intents and purposes, that's what you've got right now, Biden 2. Certainly as far as foreign and defense policy is concerned, and even in some areas of domestic policy. Everybody is disappointed, but it reaffirms something that Tucker said, because many of the same forces that want us to stay entangled and embroiled in the Middle East against the various states and people that Israel wants to attack also back this unending war in Ukraine against Russia. And again, we got to go back to the banking cartels in New York City and the city of London. They're very much interested in keeping everything going as it is. And then on top of that, you have your so-called globalist governments in places like London, Paris, and Berlin, who fear an end to this war because they know if it ends anytime soon, they're going to be eliminated as the leaders of their respective countries.
These people say the banking cartel, that's the small hats. Alex Jones used to always say the globalists, that's the small hat. The New World, all of that is the small hats. They just don't say that. So they came up, see, these people came up with nice little names to call them globalists. You know, we know who the hell the banking cartel. Who the hell is the banking cartel but the small hats?
You see, they're losing airspeed and altitude very, very quickly. So all in all, none of us should be terribly surprised, but we all have a right to be disappointed. And of course, remember, we haven't even talked about the potential for yet another conflict, a new one to emerge in Venezuela. So all of this suggests that President Trump has walked away from just about everything he said he would do or not do.
Before I play your favorite senator from South Carolina beaming over this, I want to play the president more or less restating it in the presence of President Macron. Now, Macron, in your view and mine, has crazy ideas about Europe and where they're going to get their money from and whether Russia's going to occupy Paris and all that nonsense. However, look at the sort of biting my tongue look on President Macron's face as President Trump articulates this. It's time for Russia to win back it's time for Ukraine to win back what the Russians have taken. Cut number 22.
It's been a terrible war, should have ended, and Russia should have stopped it. But they've been 3.5 years and they've gotten not so far. So we'll see what happens. But the other side can fight too, and they've proven that. Maybe it could be that Russia's a paper tiger. I don't know what they are, but 3.5 years of fighting and killing everybody, of killing 7,000 people a week for nothing. So it's a very sad situation, but most of you have seen the recent statement I put out a little while ago, and I'm glad you got it. But I feel that way. I really do feel that way. Let them get their land back.
Yep.
So we'll see how it all works out.
It's not even conceivable that they could get Crimea and the Donbass back, is it?
Not a chance. Impossible. But this is, phenomenal. It exemplifies the level of ignorance and self-delusion that is widespread in the West, and an unwillingness to see reality. There's no willingness to admit that Russia is absolutely no paper tiger. As I wrote, if anything, it appears more and more like an impregnable fortress. Russia is victorious. Russia is now well prepared for anything that we throw at them.
Anything the U.S.
up to and including nuclear weapons, I'm afraid. And that's what worries me the most, that this sort of stupidity and ignorance could inadvertently cause a major conflict between ourselves and the Russians that is completely unnecessary and counterproductive. The lack of knowledge and understanding of what's going on in the region, the history, culture, and geography, everything is just so damaging. I don't know where to begin. And that's why I wrote War, Debt, and Delusion. Now, we'll talk about that, I hope.
All right, well, explain to us the problems as you see them with debt. I mean, we're running a $37 trillion debt with the big, beautiful bill, as Trump and the Republicans call it, assuming there's no changes to it. That'll be up to $41 trillion by the time he leaves office. The military-industrial complex continues to be enriched. He claims that the NATO countries are paying for this equipment. They're probably paying for it with money borrowed from us, which we don't have, so we printed it. This is a mess.
The world is discovering that fiat currency can always be diluted in terms of its value. They're also discovering once again that gold retains its value. And so we're watching the world gradually, step by step, shift out of the dollar system and move increasingly towards gold-backed currencies. The most prominent of those currencies right now, I think, that's emerging is the yuan in China. The Chinese have set up what I would call a petro-gold exchange. And of course, this is being organized with the Saudis, and it's effectively going to replace your petrodollar. Now, what is this? Well, the Chinese are opening what I guess you might call multi-jurisdictional vaults. One in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh. They're going to have another one in Hong Kong. This is beyond the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And these are effectively warehouses for massive quantities of gold. And that means that when China and Saudi Arabia do business, they will do business in their respective currencies, because both of those currencies could be reclaimed as gold. In other words, China buys oil and gas. The Saudis buy whatever they do from the Chinese, whether it's military equipment or anything else. And both sides have access to the warehouse. And as a result, they can move that gold into their portion of the warehouse. In other words, it completely bypasses the dollar. And this is a global effort underway right now to de-dollarize. In the meantime, we're simply debasing the currency. We continue to replenish the monetary supply, the money supply, by what, 6-7%? And the more you print, the less it's worth. It's simply the truth. You don't need complex mathematics to figure that out. And our currency is being debased. And increasingly, nobody wants it. So the Chinese are dumping hundreds of millions of dollars worth of our treasuries. Ultimately, I think they'll dump all of them. And they're not the only ones. The Japanese, the Saudis, and others that hold substantial portions of our debt are shedding the United States Treasury, which in their judgment is dead weight. They're losing money. They want to get out of it. And increasingly, people don't want to do business in the dollar. Now, the Chinese banking system per se that's backing much of this is not yet as sophisticated and complex as our own, but they're moving there very, very rapidly. And it would be a mistake to believe that the world is going to rely on our SWIFT system indefinitely. It's just not going to happen. This is very, very dangerous. This is as dangerous as open warfare with Russia for the United States and the Republic.
So this is classic economics 101, which the government never follows.
No,
More money, more cash chasing the same amount of goods causes inflation.
Oh, absolutely. And it's rising out of control.
Correct. Now add to that the devaluation of the dollar. If I own an asset, whether it's land or stock or a house that I think is worth $100,000, as a result of all this, it's going to be worth less.
Yeah, well, all you have to do is go on and listen to the various experts talk about the collapse of the real estate market that's coming. And when that collapses, that's one of the pillars of wealth in the United States, as you well know. Suddenly, the thing that everybody has poured money into is going to turn out to be worth very, very little. You know, back during the Weimar Republic, with a very small few ounces of gold, you could walk in and buy beautiful homes. That's how bad it got. I think you're going to see something similar to that here in the United States.
How much longer do you think President Putin's patience will last, since you have told us, along with nearly all of your colleagues on this show and others with whom you and I communicate, that his goal really is to degrade the Ukrainian military, and he's doing so patiently, methodically, and systematically. He does not want to send an Oreshnik into a Ukrainian government building. But at some point, I would think his patience will run out. What's your take on this, Colonel?
Well, you're asking a very important question, and unfortunately, none of us have ears in the Kremlin. But we have to assume a couple of things. President Putin is going to watch very carefully to see just exactly what shows up in Western Ukraine from the NATO members, primarily Great Britain, France, and Germany, and the United States. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if all of a sudden vast quantities of SM-6 missiles, this is your standard near hypersonic device, missile, whatever, that can strike with great precision, shows up, then that will have an effect on the Russians. The Russians will say, well, do we wait until these things are all fully deployed and operational, or do we strike first? They're going to wait and see if these Taurus missiles show up. If those kinds of things happen, then the Russians will be inclined to take very, very decisive action and move their forces further west. They're already on the outskirts of Odessa. They've got plenty of people on the ground west of the Dnieper River. They just haven't brought over the weight of their conventional force. That can be done very quickly. So Odessa could fall in a space of a few days. I know that the NATO members have sent some of their forces, particularly French, and I'm told some British, into Odessa. But like the Russians, these are in very small numbers, and they appear to be special forces types. But all of this points in the direction of an escalating war. And again, the Russians have to ask, how long do we wait before this poses a real existential threat to us? Or do we just wait or not wait? That's the question. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think President Putin probably has more fundamental, concrete support from the Russian population now than ever. And there is no question in anybody's minds about the justice of his cause. Everybody has seen all the material from the bio labs that were discovered. They know what terrible things the CIA were involved with in planning. They know that the Ukrainians are now herding men in their late 50s, 60s into uniform to go become cannon fodder. They know that there are people in Ukraine openly talking about huge quantities of money that can be made by child and trafficking, human trafficking, as well as resale of goods, sale of mineral resources. And of course, Zelensky's been selling off agricultural land to the BlackRock and others. All of this is known in Moscow, and Moscow has to make the decision. Are we moving forward? Do we continue to go forward? Do we finally put an end to this regime, or do we wait until it gets worse? I don't know that answer, but I think President Putin is not surprised, sadly, by what President Trump has done. Remember, President Putin on more than one occasion has pointed out that he's watched every president transform into some version of John McCain. He didn't say John McCain, but effectively that's what he's saying. That's where we are.
Here's the present day John McCain, cut number 28.
Trump 2028. I hope this never ends. When he asks, what should you do if a Russian jet flies into your country? Shoot it down. He's tried to go out of his way to get Putin to the table. We don't want to humiliate Russia. We just want to end the war. And to our friends in Russia, here's what Trump did today. He told NATO, I'll sell you all the weapons you want. You can provide them to Ukraine. And as to Ukraine, you can use them any way you want. So to the Russian military, you're going to be up against the high-end American weapons that will be sold to NATO for the benefit of Ukraine. And this war is coming to your backyard here with no limitations like Biden.
It's like he wants the war in our backyard.
Well, that's exactly right. He's consigning Ukraine to total destruction, and he's opening the very real possibility that we end up becoming part of the war. You know, Americans have this assumption that we sit in isolation, we're invulnerable, invincible, and no one will challenge us. That's not true. And the thing we have to understand is that what we're seeing happen in the economic world, in other words, the world of the petrodollar that's vanishing from our standpoint, the emergence of new gold-backed currencies and a new financial system called BRICS, is matched in the military sphere. In other words, all of these countries are watching what we're doing. They want to get out of the dollar's way. But if we go to war stupidly, even if it's accidental with the Russians, Russia will have no shortage of friends. Now, I thought it was interesting that he talked about his friends in Russia or our friends in Russia. I don't think we have very many friends there. So if he thinks he's going to threaten or frighten the Russians, he's lost his mind. There's no chance. The Russians are not afraid. In fact, there are a lot of Russians that would welcome the opportunity to slam us. Now, talk about one thing that he keeps bringing up. Well, shoot down these Russian aircraft. There are no Russian aircraft violating our airspace. That's all nonsense. From Finland all the way down to the Black Sea, the Russians are not deliberately going into our airspace. They haven't sent anything in there deliberately. And these 19 drones that everybody is, continues to fume about, were all reconnaissance, and none of them had anything to do with delivering weapons. And finally, we're not even sure how they got there, but the Russians and the Belarusians have given us all the information we could want. They've opened the kimono, so to say, so that we can investigate it. We don't want to investigate it. We're looking for a reason to attack Russia. The Russians aren't going to give it to us.
Colonel, I could talk to you about this for another hour, but I have to run. Thank you very much for your time, for your insight, my dear friend. I also want to talk to you next time we're together next week about the freedom of speech. Used to be fundamental in America.
We have an
we will be together there. You are.
Is getting closer and closer. And this will have massive repercussions on the rest of the world. Not only will this impact global politics, but it will have a profound influence on the global economy. Russia's President Vladimir Putin took a historic trip to China in September for 2 meetings. The first was the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And this summit was historic because it showed how India has improved its relations with China after the US has been trying to divide China and India. Instead, at the SCO summit, we saw symbolically how China's president, Xi Jinping, Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, and India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, all came together in a clear message to the US-led West, saying, you're not going to be able to divide and conquer us. Then, after that meeting, China held a military parade on the 3rd of September, marking the 80th anniversary of the victory against the Japanese Empire in World War II. And this event prominently featured China's President Xi and Russia's President Putin, along with leaders of many other important global South countries. It was another sign of growing unity. Now, in these meetings, China and Russia signed dozens of agreements, and Russia announced that one of those deals was a legally binding memorandum announcing that China and Russia are going to build a massive new pipeline called Power of Siberia 2. Now, Power of Siberia 1 already exists. This brings natural gas from eastern Russia in Siberia to northeastern China. And then it connects to a series of pipelines inside China that bring natural gas down to major cities. The contract to build Nord Stream 1 was signed back in 2014 after the US and European countries imposed sanctions on Russia following the coup in Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. So the construction of Power of Siberia 1 was partially a message by Russia to the West, in which Moscow was saying, we don't need to sell our gas to you, we can sell our gas to China. Keep that in mind, because now they're talking about building Power of Siberia 2 for similar geopolitical reasons. Now, the idea of building Power of Siberia 2 has been discussed for many years, and it was long considered essentially a dead project. But the CEO of Russia's state-owned gas giant Gazprom announced this September that China and Russia had signed the legally binding contract to build this pipeline. And he noted that this agreement will be for 30 years. So this is a long-term deal that will have significant geopolitical and economic consequences. The Gazprom CEO emphasized that Power of Siberia 2 will be, quote, the largest, the most massive and capital-intensive gas project in the world, end quote. It will be more than 4,000 kilometers long. And I should add that another part of this agreement is that Russia will increase the amount of gas that it exports to China through the existing Power of Siberia 1 pipeline. The Gazprom CEO also pointed out that Russia has been selling its gas to China not in dollars, but in the local currencies of both countries. 50% of the sales are in Russia's currency, the ruble, and the other half are in China's currency, the renminbi or yuan. So this is also an important issue because it involves the global de-dollarization movement as more and more countries seek alternatives to the global dominance of the US dollar. The geopolitical and economic impact of Power of Siberia 2 will also be especially felt in Europe, because Power of Siberia 2 is going to bring gas from the northern Yamal fields in Russia and then travel down south through Mongolia and then into northeastern China. This is very significant geopolitically because, again, one, it involves Mongolia, and two, because Europe was previously buying a lot of natural gas from Russia that came from these Yamal fields. And that gas was delivered to Europe in another pipeline called the Yamal-Europe pipeline. Now, before this new phase of the war in Ukraine started in 2022, the Yamal-Europe pipeline was one of the main sources of Russia's gas exports to Europe. Ironically, the plurality of Russian gas originally was sent through Ukraine, and that continued to be the case even into 2023 and 2024. But Europe has pledged to boycott Russian gas, so the deliveries have fallen substantially. And another major pipeline that was used to deliver Russian gas to Europe, in addition to the pipelines that go through Ukraine and the Yamal-Europe pipeline, was the Nord Stream pipeline. Nord Stream refers to two different systems of pipelines, each of which had two pipelines within them, and they connected Russia to Germany through the Baltic Sea. Now, Nord Stream 2 was never actually used, but Nord Stream 1 was one of the main ways in which Russia exported natural gas to Europe. And in 2022, the Nord Stream systems were sabotaged. They were blown up in an attack. And by the way, speaking of Nord Stream, in a meeting in the White House that Trump held with Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, the former head of Germany's arm of BlackRock, Trump boasted that he ended the Nord Stream pipelines. And in particular, he made it clear that he wants to force Europe to buy more and more energy from the US. That is LNG, liquefied natural gas from the US, and oil from the US, not from Russia. Listen to Trump's very frank remarks here.
Well, remember, I'm the one that ended Nord Stream 2, going to a place called Germany, come to think of it. I'm sorry I did that. But I ended Nord Stream 2. Nobody else did. That's the largest, essentially the largest pipeline in the world, going to Germany and other countries. And by the way, we have so much oil and gas, you will not be able to buy it all. I mean, you literally, we have so much, and I hope we're going to make that a part of our trade deal because we have more than anybody else. We have actually the most by far in the world, probably double what anyone else has. So we'll work on that. But I'm sure that's something we'll discuss today.
So this means that even if Europe wanted to buy Russian natural gas, it can no longer get it from the Nord Stream pipeline, and delivery of gas in the pipeline that goes through Ukraine fell to zero in the first half of 2025. And now Russia is considering sending its gas from the Yamal Peninsula in northern Russia to China instead of to Europe, which was the other major source of Russian gas. So the announcement of the deal to build Power of Siberia 2 is a very big deal that will have enormous consequences on Europe, and especially on Europe's manufacturing sector, because we've seen that in recent years, the cost of energy has become very high in Europe, and this has been devastating to the manufacturing sector, especially in Germany, to such a degree that Bloomberg published an article in 2024 titled "Germany's Days as an Industrial Superpower Are Coming to an End." It noted that the energy crisis was the final blow for a growing number of German manufacturers. And this is going to have a huge ripple effect across all of Europe because Germany is the economic core of Europe, and the manufacturing sector is the heart of the German economy. For decades, the German economy has essentially been considered synonymous with the manufacturing sector, and especially with the car industry, with massively popular global brands like BMW and Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz. But now we've seen that these German companies can no longer compete, not only because of the extremely expensive energy costs, but also because China has become a major global manufacturer of cars, and Chinese companies are competing very effectively with not only German companies, but with other European companies. So the loss of cheap Russian energy is devastating the European economy. And geopolitically, the announcement of Power of Siberia 2 is extremely important because it shows how China and Russia are continuing to deepen their relations. And this is not just a short-term partnership. This is going to be a long-term, close relationship. Because again, the deal for Power of Siberia 2 is a 30-year deal. And the decision to build this shows that Russia's leadership has made the assessment that the future of Russia lies in deepening its political and economic integration with Asia and with the global South, not with Europe and not with the broader West. And although today it seems like this is very obvious because Russia is a key player in BRICS, and Russia is also part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the vast majority of the members of these groups are Global South countries. However, this was not always the case. This was not inevitable. As recently as 20 years ago, Russia was still trying to integrate into the West. In fact, Russia was part of the G8, now known as the G7, it was the G8 because the US-led West expanded the G7 and allowed Russia to join. Now, that was originally under Boris Yeltsin, who was essentially an alcoholic US puppet who did whatever Washington wanted. But even when Putin came to power in 2000, he was seen as a pro-Western leader. Putin speaks fluent German, and he was very friendly to Europe, and he basically saw the future of Russia originally lying in deepening its integration with Europe as part of the broader European family. However, the US government's insistence on constantly expanding NATO to the east to surround Russia with a US-led military alliance angered Moscow, and in 2007, Putin delivered a historic speech at the Munich Security Conference in which he complained about NATO expansion and US military aggression. This is, of course, 4 years after the US invaded Iraq in an illegal war of aggression. And Putin said that the world no longer wanted this unipolar order dominated by the US empire that was trying to seek global hegemony. Putin instead began talking about the importance of building a multipolar world order. And then relations between Russia and the West got even worse in 2014, following the US-backed coup in Ukraine, which overthrew Ukraine's democratically elected leader, who was geopolitically neutral, and instead installed a pro-Western oligarch who pledged that Ukraine would join NATO. This kicked off the first phase of the proxy war in Ukraine, and Russia feared that as Ukraine became more and more of a de facto member of NATO, that Russia would lose access to its only warm water port, Sevastopol, which is located in Crimea. This was the US strategy, was to try to prevent Russia from accessing one of its most important ports. This would permanently deny Russia access to the Black Sea, turning the Black Sea into a NATO protectorate. So Russia made the decision to annex Crimea, and in response, the US-led West imposed sanctions on Russia, and they expelled Russia from the G8, turning it back into the G7. And in the past decade, relations between the West and Russia have only gotten worse and worse until this new phase of the war in Ukraine started in 2022. And basically, the West tore off the Band-Aid at once and imposed thousands of sanctions on Russia, trying to decouple from Russia economically. The European Union vowed to boycott Russian oil and has tried to wean itself off of Russian gas. So where did Russia export its oil and gas instead? Increasingly to Asia, to China, the number one trading partner of Russia, but also other Asian economies like India. And following the Western sanctions on Russia in 2022, Russia's trade with China exploded. As recently as 2010, only around 5% of Russia's exports went to China. However, by 2023, over 30% of Russia's exports were going to China. At the same time, Russia has been importing more and more from China, and as of 2023, over 36% of Russia's imports come from China. China has become by far the most important trading partner of Russia. And almost all of this bilateral trade between China and Russia is done using their national currencies, not the dollar. As of 2023, 95% of their bilateral trade was using rubles or yuan. So this shows how China and Russia both share a common interest in supporting the global de-dollarization movement, challenging the hegemony of the US dollar. And this, of course, also comes at a time when US President Donald Trump is weaponizing trade, and he's threatening to impose tariffs on countries all around the world, including China. China has been the main target of Trump's economic war. At one point, Trump's tariffs on China were over 140%, which was basically a trade embargo. And Bloomberg pointed out that the decision by China and Russia to build the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline is also related to Trump's tariff war and overall economic war. Bloomberg pointed out that in response to Trump's unilateral tariffs on China, Beijing responded proportionately by hitting exports of U.S. LNG, U.S. liquefied natural gas, with Chinese tariffs. And between February and September 2025, China did not import any U.S. LNG. This was also the conclusion reached by the U.S. think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is a neoconservative think tank in Washington, D.C. It is very anti-Russia and anti-China, but it pointed out correctly that the Power of Siberia 2 deal can reshape global energy. An analyst at this think tank pointed out that by signing this deal, China can also be trying to convince the Trump administration and the world that it needs far less LNG, that's far less liquefied natural gas. Instead, China will get pipeline gas from Russia. And therefore, the U.S. cannot use its gas exports to China as leverage in the U.S.-China trade negotiations. And this has, in fact, been one of the main demands that Trump has been imposing on other countries. Trump wants other countries to buy more gas and oil from the United States. And obviously, the U.S. is on the other side of the world across the Pacific Ocean. So the U.S. cannot build a pipeline to China. But Trump wants to force economies in Asia, like China, but also Japan and South Korea. He wants to use tariffs to force these countries to import more liquefied natural gas that is sent on ships across the ocean. And by the way, this is a major reason why Trump has been threatening sky-high tariffs on India, which has historically been a U.S. ally. The excuse that Trump has been using is that he's imposing 50% tariffs on India because it's a punishment because New Delhi has been buying lots and lots of oil from Russia. And by the way, this makes perfect sense for India to do this because Russia has been selling that oil to India at a discount. And then what has India been doing? India has been refining the crude oil it imports from Russia and then exporting the gasoline to Europe. So India has become the number one fuel supplier to Europe, even though India does not actually produce a lot of crude oil. Basically, all of that oil is coming from Russia. So Europe says that it's going to boycott Russian oil, but it's actually still buying that oil indirectly from India. But Trump is angry about this because he wants India and other countries to instead buy U.S. oil and U.S. LNG. So one of Trump's goals in the tariffs that he's threatening on countries all around the world is he wants these countries to become more dependent on importing energy from the U.S., not from Russia.
And by the way, we have so much oil and gas, you will not be able to buy it all. I mean, you literally, we have so much, and I hope we're going to make that a part of our trade deal.
Now, this fact isn't talked about enough, but one of the biggest geopolitical shifts in recent decades is the rise of the United States as the number one producer in the world of not only crude oil, but also natural gas. In recent years, the U.S. has also overtaken Australia and Qatar as the number one exporter of liquefied natural gas on Earth. Now, the majority of U.S. LNG exports go to Europe, but in the past few years, U.S. LNG exports to Asia have been increasing, and Trump is trying to use tariffs to force Asian economies to import more U.S. LNG. So more and more what the U.S. government is doing is weaponizing all aspects of the economy. The U.S. has been weaponizing the dollar through the imposition of unilateral sanctions. Trump has been weaponizing access to the U.S. market and trade through the imposition of unilateral tariffs. And Trump is also weaponizing the energy market and the fact that the U.S. is the number one producer of oil and gas on Earth. However, China has been preparing for many years, and it made sure that it was not too dependent on U.S. energy. As of 2024, only 3.7% of China's overall imports of natural gas came from the U.S. In fact, the largest exporter of natural gas to China is Australia at 23%, and Russia is the second biggest exporter at 20%. However, what's unique about Russia's exports of natural gas to China is that Russia sends both pipeline gas and LNG, whereas Australia doesn't have a pipeline across the ocean with China. Obviously, Australia is sending its gas as LNG. As of 2024, 34% of China's imports of LNG came from Australia. The second biggest exporter of LNG to China is Qatar at 24%. And the third biggest is Russia at 11.3%. So what this does show is a vulnerability for China. China gets over half of its liquefied natural gas from Australia and Qatar, which are US allies. So in the future, if Washington decides to weaponize gas even further and pressure Australia and Qatar, or threaten Australia and Qatar and tell them that they have to stop exporting LNG to China, China could lose access to its two most important exporters of LNG. So I think this is another reason why China has made the decision to increase its dependency on imports of Russian gas via pipeline. This is a significant factor, I think, in why China and Russia have agreed to build the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. Because if you look at China's imports of natural gas by pipeline, the number one provider is actually not Russia. It's Turkmenistan at over 45% of pipeline gas exports to China, whereas Russia is 38% of gas exports to China. And by the way, I should point out that all of this data is based on the cost in dollars of China's oil imports. And that's because it's hard to compare pipeline gas and LNG if you're just using volume. But anyway, the point to take away from this geopolitically is that China and Russia have clearly made the assessment that going into the future, their relations are going to remain very close, and Russia is going to become the number one energy partner of China. So if the US tries to weaponize LNG and the US Navy tries to prevent other countries from sending their LNG to China on ships across the ocean, well, China can instead get more and more natural gas via pipeline from Russia. This is about energy security for China. And for Russia, this means that going into the future, it no longer needs to depend on exporting its natural gas to Europe. This means that economically, Europe is going to become more and more dependent on the United States. Europe is essentially becoming an economic and military protectorate of the US empire in the US imperial sphere of influence, as instead Russia is deepening its integration with Asia, not just with China, but also with India and Turkey and other major growing economies. And this issue of energy security is very important for China because we see that the US government, not only under Trump, this was also the case under Biden and Obama, but especially under Trump, the US government is trying to impose its hegemony on the Western Hemisphere. Multiple officials in the Trump administration, both in the first term and the second term, have invoked the 200-year-old colonial Monroe Doctrine to threaten countries in the Western Hemisphere, essentially saying that all of the Western Hemisphere is part of the US imperial sphere of influence. And for China, this is a major issue of energy security because, as the website oilprice.com pointed out, the Western Hemisphere in recent years has become the main driver of global growth in oil production. So in the Western Hemisphere, you now have some of the leading producers of oil on Earth, including the US, Brazil, Canada, Guyana, Venezuela, and Mexico. And the US has been threatening basically all of these countries and telling them they cannot have close relations with China and Russia. So in the future, the US may weaponize oil and tell Mexico and Brazil and Canada, you can no longer export oil to China. The US may try to impose an oil embargo on China. I mean, the US is already launching yet another coup attempt in Venezuela, and China has become the main importer of Venezuelan oil. So the US has already been trying to weaponize oil in the Western Hemisphere. So this is a significant reason why China has instead been depending on importing large amounts of oil from countries that are in Asia or Eurasia that are much closer, where it's much more difficult for the US to intercept oil shipments from Russia or from Malaysia or from Iraq. These are three of the most important oil exporters to China. Of course, China is still very dependent on importing oil from the Persian Gulf monarchies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. China has been slowly trying to reduce its dependency on imports from the Gulf because it's afraid that the US could try to block off the Strait of Hormuz, which would prevent the Gulf monarchies from exporting their oil to China. If there were a conventional US military war on China, this would be a very realistic possibility. Another realistic possibility would be the US Navy trying to block the Strait of Malacca, which is another very important choke point through which China's oil imports travel. So China is very afraid of the possibility of the US trying to launch an energy blockade on China, both an oil blockade and a natural gas blockade. But the US can't prevent Russia from sending pipeline gas and oil to China because they're neighbors. The US doesn't control Russia and China. So again, the point to take away from all of this is that by deepening the integration of Russia and China through building new pipelines like the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, what this shows is that China is increasing its energy security and Russia is deepening its integration with Eurasia and no longer even considering in the future trying to join the West. Russia has made it clear as day that its future lies in Eurasian integration, not in Western integration. Meanwhile, in Europe, the exact opposite is happening. Europe is becoming more and more subordinated to the US empire to such a degree that even mainstream think tanks in Europe that are funded by European governments, like the European Council on Foreign Relations, are warning that Europe is becoming a vassal of the United States. That is their language, a vassal. So clearly, the biggest loser in all of these geopolitical shifts is Europe. And we can see this so clearly in the unequal treaty that Trump imposed on the European Union, in which now the EU has to accept 15% US tariffs on European exports to the US, but the EU cannot retaliate with tariffs on US exports to the EU. And in fact, when Trump announced this deal that he imposed on Europe in a press conference with the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, Trump boasted that he is forcing Europe to buy hundreds of billions of dollars of weapons from the US military-industrial complex and energy, oil and natural gas from the US.
They're going to be purchasing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of military equipment. They're very important. They're going to purchase $750 billion worth of energy. So that's going to be great. And $600 billion worth of investments into the United States over and above what they have. And again, the energy is a very important component because we have more energy than anybody else in that sense. And I think it was very wise that they buy a lot of energy.
Now, this is coming at a time when the U.S. is already the #1 exporter of oil to Europe. Now, until 2022, Russia was by far the #1 oil exporter to the EU. And back in 2016, Russia exported 10 times more crude oil to the EU than the United States did. But as of 2023, the US overtook Russia as the #1 exporter of oil to Europe. And over time, Europe is boycotting Russian oil, importing less and less Russian oil, and more US oil. The same thing happened with natural gas. In 2022, Russia was the #1 exporter of gas to the EU. Those exports have been falling more and more as well. In 2016, the US did not export any natural gas to Europe. Now, the US is the second biggest source of natural gas exports to Europe. Norway is still the #1 overall because Norway is sending that gas through pipelines. But if you look at LNG, it's like a joke. The US has become by far the biggest exporter of LNG to Europe. And now with this unequal treaty that Trump imposed on Europe, he's going to force Europe to buy even more LNG. So what this means is that Europe is becoming completely dependent on the US empire. And in the future, if a US leader wants to weaponize energy and prevent Europe from getting LNG, this will only devastate the European economy. And this comes at a time when the European economy is already being devastated by the extremely high costs of energy. I talked earlier about how German industry is in severe decline to such a degree that Bloomberg warned that Germany's days as an industrial superpower are coming to an end because of how expensive energy is. And a big reason that energy is so expensive is because the US is now sending LNG on ships across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe instead of the cheap pipeline gas that the EU was previously getting from Russia, which is the neighbor of Europe. And this is why the EU's former foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, admitted in 2022 that Europe's prosperity, its economic model, was based, one, on cheap energy from Russia, and two, cheap labor they could exploit in China, and also access to China's enormous market for exports of manufactured goods, especially German cars. Listen here to this very revealing admission by the EU's former foreign policy chief.
So our prosperity was based on China and Russia, energy and market. US takes care of our security. China and Russia provide the basis of our prosperity. And the access to the big China market for exports and imports, for technological transfer, for investment, and for having cheap goods. I think that the Chinese workers with their low salaries has done much better and much more to contain inflation than all the central banks together. So our prosperity was based on China and Russia, energy and market.
What we've been seeing in recent years is that the US empire has been turning Europe into its imperial protectorate, and Europe has been self-sabotaging, destroying its own economy to benefit the US empire. Europe has cut off access to cheap energy from what previously was its most important energy partner and is now dependent on importing much more expensive energy from the US. And the US is pressuring Europe to take more and more of an antagonistic line against China as well. And China previously was one of the most important trading partners of Europe, especially as a market for European exports. And this combination of the loss of cheap Russian energy and the loss of access to the Chinese market has led to what the major German newspaper Der Spiegel describes as, quote, an existential crisis in the German auto industry, end quote. An existential crisis. What Germany's top newspaper is essentially saying is that the heart of Germany's economy and the heart of the European Union's economy is on the verge of dying because of these policies carried out by the pro-US Atlanticist leaders of the EU at the behest of Washington. I mean, the crisis is now so severe in Europe that you even have websites that are not political websites. They're focused on news about the car industry, which are publishing articles titled, "How Screwed is the European Car Industry?" Because as Europe has been sabotaging its economy on behalf of Washington, China has been rapidly moving up the global value chain, and China has become the #1 producer of cars on Earth, overtaking Europe. In 2000, China only produced 1% of all cars on Earth. In 2024, China produced 39% of the world's autos. And China's dominance is especially clear if you look at the future of the automotive industry, which is electric vehicles, EVs. Now, it is true that Chinese companies have not caught up in the global sale of gas-guzzling cars, which are known as ICEs, internal combustion engine vehicles. The top companies still selling ICE vehicles around the world are from Japan and Germany and the US and South Korea. These are companies like Toyota and Volkswagen and Honda and Ford and Hyundai. However, if you look at global sales of EVs, the majority of the companies selling EVs are Chinese companies. The number one seller of EVs on earth is now the Chinese giant BYD, which has overtaken Tesla. But there are other major Chinese companies that are producing EVs now, including Wuling, Li Auto, Geely, Volvo, SAIC, Chang'an, and others. There are more than 100 EV manufacturers that are competing today in China. It is a ferociously competitive market. And what is clear is that in the future, the EV industry will be dominated by China, period. European companies simply cannot compete. So this is exactly why Bloomberg warned that Germany's days as an industrial superpower are coming to an end. And I would say Europe's days as an industrial superpower are also coming to an end. Because China is not only competing in the production of automobiles, China is competing in every sector. China has become the world's manufacturing superpower. And the self-destructive policies carried out by the Atlanticist pro-US leaders in Europe have benefited the United States at the expense of their own countries. So the other major conclusion to take away from this analysis today is that as we see these massive geopolitical shifts and economic shifts happening in the world today, the big loser in all of this is Europe. And I think this is another major reason why the Russian leadership made the assessment that its future lies in deepening its political and economic integration with Asia as part of a larger Eurasian project, not with Europe and not with the West. Because more and more we see the West is digging its own grave. And the 21st century is clearly the Asian century. The majority of the world population is in Asia. The fastest growing economies are in Asia. They are moving up the value chain, and they are reversing a process of centuries of Western colonialism. And if you want to learn more about these very important shifts that are happening in the world today, please subscribe here to our work at Geopolitical Economy Report. I am Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please.
Chinese and Russian nuclear-capable bombers conducted a joint patrol over the Sea of Japan on Friday. China's H-6N nuclear-capable bomber, its first appearance in such an exercise.
The U.S. does not currently have the ability to even track this weapon, much less defeat it. It will give the Chinese the ability to conduct a nuclear strike.
It's midnight over the Pacific. A lone Chinese H-6N bomber glides thousands of feet above the ocean, its silhouette barely detectable by radar. Inside the bay of this aircraft is something the world has never seen before on a parade ground, something that could change the balance of power overnight. With a single command, a massive missile drops free, its rocket engines ignite, and it streaks into the stratosphere. Moments later, America's homeland, New York, Washington, Los Angeles, is suddenly under threat of annihilation. That missile is the JL-1, China's brand new air-launched nuclear weapon revealed for the first time during the 2025 Victory Day parade in Beijing. And it's not just another missile, it's a message. China now has the ability to launch nuclear strikes from the sky, anywhere, anytime. Welcome back to Race to Space, the channel where we break down the future of warfare and the weapons that are reshaping global power. Today, we're diving into why the JL-1 missile could be one of the most dangerous tools in China's arsenal, and why the Pentagon is suddenly losing sleep over it. At its core, it's an air-launched ballistic missile, a missile carried by China's H-6N strategic bomber. Unlike land-based missiles that must be fired from silos or submarines, this one can be launched mid-air, thousands of kilometers away from Chinese territory. And here's where it gets shocking. The JL-1 has an estimated range of 8,000 kilometers. That's far enough to hit almost any major U.S. city if launched from over the Pacific. In practical terms, Beijing could launch an H-6N from deep inside Chinese airspace, climb to altitude, release the JL-1, and watch as the missile covers the distance from Asia to the American East Coast. And it doesn't stop there. The JL-1 is said to be dual capable, meaning it can carry both nuclear warheads and conventional warheads. Some analysts even suggest it has an anti-ship role, which means it could potentially target U.S. aircraft carriers at sea. Think about that. One missile that could either level a city with a nuclear strike or sink the very ships that guarantee U.S. power in the Pacific. Why does this matter so much? For decades, America's advantage wasn't just about having nuclear weapons. It was about how fast, flexible, and survivable those weapons were. The U.S. had air-launched nuclear missiles like the AGM-86ALCM, carried by B-52 bombers, capable of striking targets thousands of miles away. These gave Washington the ability to project nuclear firepower across the globe. China, meanwhile, was limited. Most of its nuclear force relied on ground-based missiles, or, more recently, submarine-launched missiles. But the air-launched nuclear leg of the triad was missing. Without it, Beijing's deterrent wasn't complete. The JL-1 changes that. With this missile, China now enters the same strategic territory as the US and Russia, true nuclear triad capability. And here's the frightening part. It's not just about striking distance. An air-launched missile means mobility and unpredictability. Land-based missiles can be watched by satellites. Submarines can be tracked by sonar. But an aircraft, it can take off from anywhere, change direction mid-flight, and launch a strike without warning. For U.S. defenses, that's a nightmare scenario. Imagine trying to track every Chinese bomber across Asia, every flight, every exercise, never knowing if one of them is carrying a live JL-1 ready to fire. The stakes couldn't be higher, because for the first time, America isn't facing just China's land and sea deterrent. It's facing all three: land, sea, and now air. Tensions flare over Taiwan. U.S. carriers move into the Philippine Sea, F-35s take off, and Chinese anti-ship missiles start flying. But above the chaos, a Chinese H-6N bomber takes off from the mainland. It flies south, far enough to stay under China's air defense umbrella, and then turns east into open ocean. Inside its bay is a JL-1. The order comes in. The missile drops, its engines ignite, and it climbs to altitude before streaking across the Pacific. In just over 30 minutes, it's racing toward the U.S. West Coast. Radars in Alaska and California pick it up. Alarms blare in command centers, and American generals scramble interceptors. But here's the problem. The JL-1 may be carrying a MIRV payload, multiple warheads. Even if the U.S. missile defense system intercepts one, others slip through. Within moments, cities like San Francisco or Los Angeles could be turned into smoking craters. Now imagine a different scenario. Instead of heading for cities, the JL-1 is aimed at the ocean, at a U.S. carrier strike group. One warhead, even conventional, detonates near the carrier, and the shockwave alone could cripple flight operations. With a nuclear warhead, a single hit could eliminate an entire U.S. naval task force in one strike. For the U.S., this isn't just about nuclear destruction. It's about losing control of the seas. Carriers, the backbone of American dominance, suddenly become sitting ducks against a missile launched from the sky. But here's the part no one saw coming. The JL-1 may not just be a straightforward ballistic missile. Some reports suggest it could be a hybrid design, part ballistic, part cruise missile. In other words, instead of flying in a predictable arc like a traditional nuke, it might maneuver mid-flight, change trajectory, and confuse U.S. radar systems. This makes it incredibly difficult to intercept. America's missile defense systems, like the ground-based mid-course defense in Alaska, are designed for predictable ballistic arcs. If the JL-1 can weave or glide, those defenses may simply fail. And there's another twist. The H-6N bomber that carries the JL-1 is rumored to be capable of aerial refueling. That means it could launch from deep inland China, refuel midair, and extend its reach even further, potentially launching JL-1 strikes from places the U.S. doesn't expect. Think about the implications. A mobile, refuelable bomber carrying an 8,000-kilometer missile that may split into multiple warheads. For the Pentagon, that's a triple nightmare: range, flexibility, and unpredictability. The JL-1 isn't just filling a gap in China's arsenal, it's rewriting the rules of nuclear deterrence. So here's where we stand in 2025. China has shown the world the JL-1, a missile that can be launched from the sky, strike anywhere in America, overwhelm defenses, and even sink U.S. carriers. For decades, the U.S. relied on oceans as buffers and carriers as symbols of dominance. With the JL-1, both are suddenly at risk. The terrifying truth is this: America is no longer safe by distance. The Pacific isn't a shield. The JL-1 puts every city, every base, and every fleet under China's chaotic radar. But if you think the JL-1 is dangerous, wait until you see what China is hiding under its flagship J-20 fighter. With all the new upgrades, that fighter jet is deadlier than ever. You can check out that video here. That's coming up right here on Race to Space, where we uncover the weapons that will define the wars of tomorrow. Because the scariest weapons aren't always the ones you see on a parade float. Sometimes they're already out there waiting. This is Race to Space, and we will see you in the next one.
Have you heard that Israel is going to bomb China because apparently Hamas is at Beijing? I know. Yeah. He really thinks that he's going to pull this off, because I really fucking hope he does. China's going to show them what it's mean to fuck around and find out. Yo, I know.
So you're telling me a country with a GDP smaller than the state of Illinois that already got slapped around by Iran thinks it can threaten a nuclear-armed superpower with the world's largest navy? Welcome to 2025, where geopolitical satire writes itself. Let's get into it.
I'm Chinese. Israel has accused China of hating Hamas in Beijing. They even said they would come to Beijing to arrest them. This is beyond ridiculous. As an ordinary Chinese person, I want to say this to Israel. You are welcome to China. China hates the war, but we are never afraid of war. Especially not afraid of the provocation of those who destroy the humanity and bring evil to the world. Justice will always protect this world. So think it very carefully, Israel. The whole world is watching you. How long do you plan to keep hurting humanity? To be honestly, as a Chinese person, I don't even feel the need to respond to you, because we never consider it. You are a real opponent. That is, peace for the world, and many people live with happiness and joy.
Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, feeling the heat of being an international pariah, with 142 countries at the UN voting to recognize a Palestinian state, is lashing out. He's blaming China for a propaganda campaign. But let's talk numbers, not nonsense. China's economy is nearly 35 times larger than Israel's. 35. China's annual military budget is over $300 billion. Israel's about $27 billion. And a good chunk of that is a yearly allowance from the US. The idea that Israel could project force into Beijing is not just ridiculous, it's a delusion of grandeur fueled by desperation. And as the guy said, China isn't afraid of war, but more importantly, they don't even see this as a credible threat. It's like a chihuahua barking at a dragon. Now let's check out some comments. Easy W for China. Israel can't handle Iran, can't dare Turkey. China is out of the question. If China attacks Israel, I will move to China. Elsa Kelly says, threatening the country that published The Art of War is insane. Mel says, American here, I stand with China. And this comment goes, yo, imagine China frees Palestine.
Is going to crash America out. I've never seen another human so gung on war.
Things to break loose from this siege that is organized by a few states. One is China, and the other is Qatar. And they're organizing an attack on Israel, legitimacy, in the social media of the Western world and the United States.
Ever in my life, all through middle school, high school, learning history, we've never seen an individual like this. So now, Bibi is claiming that China and Iran are coming together to propose an attack on Israel. You're just gonna have to get the fuck out of here if you think that we believe that, okay? This dude is gun-ho. He wants America to back him up with anything this dude imagines. If Israel goes to war with China, guess who's coming with America? Do you think America wants any part of this dude creating wars for us to fight? I don't know what has to be done, but something has to be done. Like America, we got to stand up. We have to talk about this stuff because Bibi is literally running us here. Anything this man imagines, anything that comes to this guy's mind, he gets up on that stage and preaches it like it's the truth. I don't know how far this is going to go. Now he wants to go into Beijing. What? Come on. Listen, dude. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm not here for it. I don't want no parts of it. And I'm pretty sure anybody watching this, except Blue State members, would agree.
Yeah, this guy sees the writing on the wall. Netanyahu isn't just talking crazy. He's trying to write a check that America would have to cash. Netanyahu himself admitted Israel is in international isolation. The EU is already talking about suspending trade agreements. His own opposition leader called his statements about China insane. This isn't a strategic move, it's a political tantrum. He's trying to create a new, bigger enemy to distract from the global condemnation of his actions in Gaza and his own political instability at home. The US has its own problems. It would be incredibly stupid of the US to get dragged into a suicidal war with China to save Netanyahu from himself. Now let's check out some comments. I swear, if this man starts World War III by starting a war with China and the US backs him, I'm siding with China. He's Satan. He's all about destruction. China would win either economically or militarily. Netanyahu is out of his mind. And Firestarter says, I really want Israel to attack China and Qatar so they can kick Israel's ass.
The country that's currently committing a genocide in Gaza is now threatening China and basically saying, oh, you're harboring fugitives from Hamas. You're an adversary in this war. Like, we're going to get you in Beijing. First of all, China will blow all this shit up. They'll ruin everyone's day. Yeah. China will quite literally be the end all be all. So I just feel like that's not the fight that you want to do. And I don't really, root for war. But if you try China, oh yeah, that's the end of that. That's absolutely the end of that. I don't know what happens next, quite literally, because China isn't going to just let that shit slide. Like she's not just going to stand down in an attack. You know what I mean? Like China's probably going to do the biggest one, the very biggest one of all time. So it's like for that country to even be threatening China at all and being like, oh, we're going to come to Beijing and we're going to get you guys. And you guys are now officially a part of this war, pretty much. It's like, I don't think you want to do that. I don't think you want to do that with China. China, she's not playing a game. She's not doing theatrics and like China. No, she's going to get you. I would say respectfully, but it doesn't even matter. She's going to get you so bad it doesn't even matter. like I would just, she will blow all this shit up. She will end all of this shit. She will be like, yeah, I was minding my business. You brought me into this, bitch. Now it's done. Now it's over because I didn't want to play the game. I don't want to play the game. And it will be done. Just saying.
This isn't a regional skirmish in the Middle East. This is China, the country with over 2 million active military personnel, the world's largest navy by ship count, and a nuclear arsenal that can reach any point on the globe. Israel's military, while technologically advanced, is designed for conflicts with its immediate neighbors, not for a global power projection. Here's the reality. China ranks number 3 globally in military power according to Global Firepower Index. Israel ranks 15. That's not even close. Threatening to go into Beijing is like a local street fighter threatening to take on the entire heavyweight boxing division at once. It's not brave, it's stupid. China has a doctrine of strategic patience, but that doesn't mean they're dormant. An attack on their capital city, that's not something you walk back from. And as the speaker said, China isn't playing games. They would end it and it wouldn't even be a contest. And Melody says, China been here longer than that land was so-called promised to them. Henry says, actually, China knows the fate of Israel in the future based on 200 BC, where a scholar described how a small nation met its demise. Translate in English. A state that is small but does not remain humble, has little power but does not fear the strong, is rude and insults its larger neighbors, or is greedy, obstinate, and poor at diplomacy, is destined to ruin. And this comment goes, laugh my ass off. China is a manufacturing powerhouse, one of the biggest economies in the world, and one of the oldest nations still existing. Good luck to Israel. Travel Keep says, can I just put it out there? I'm on China's side. And this comment goes, China has survived over 5,000 years and countless wars. They will win. That's not even a debate. So what have we learned today? We've learned that when a cornered politician is facing condemnation from the entire world, they'll say anything to change the subject. Threatening China is not a policy. It's a pathetic cry for attention from a leader who has made his country a global outcast. The data is clear. Israel attacking China is a fantasy, a dangerous delusional fantasy. It's a distraction from the real issues, and it's an insult to everyone's intelligence. Don't fall for the hype. Look at the numbers. Think for yourselves. Thanks for watching. If you want more reality checks like this,
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geopolitics and Money. Very, very excited to be with you. I know I was in China, Elizabeth. We didn't do live for what, 3 weeks now? So
we did not do a live while you were in China, unfortunately. But for the couple of weeks that you're back, we're going to do lives. But if you guys have not been paying, or if you have not gotten notifications, we've been doing a whole bunch of recorded shows for you guys.
So, and by the way, I take this opportunity to say thank you for helping me out with the videos when I was in China. So I want you to, I give credit where credit is due. So.
Well, thank you. You are very welcome.
Yeah. Anyway, we're very excited. We're very, go ahead, Elizabeth. Go ahead.
This topic should be screamed from the rooftops.
Indeed.
I want to start with that. This topic should be screamed from the rooftops. If people knew ahead of time in the 30s that they were going to outlaw gold and the United States was going to confiscate their gold ahead of time, how would they have prepared differently? If they knew that Nixon was going to pull the US dollar off the gold standard and gold was going to be revalued over and over again, basically, ahead of time, how would you behave differently? This is exactly how I feel about our today's topic, and about the fact that this Russian presidential advisor basically called the United States out on their plan. And quite frankly, we have a whole bunch of evidence to suggest that this is very likely going to happen. to dump the $37 trillion of debt that the United States has into cryptocurrency. And then we will discuss a little bit later how that is then potentially going to be devalued.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very, very hot topic. Unfortunately, most Americans have no idea what's going on. The advisor you are talking about, Elizabeth, is Anton Kabiagov. You know, I have a picture of him right here. He's the advisor to Russian president on the economic and financial matter, and he's the one who brought this up to the surface. And basically, it's mind blowing. So we're gonna listen to a clip for what he was saying, and we'll take it from there.
Ain't nobody talking about this, that Putin exposed, Russia exposed what Trump and them was trying to do. They were trying to erase their $37 trillion debt using crypto. I seen a little bit of this that I got off the story, but Russia absolutely owns what the U.S. is trying to do and letting the whole world know they're not going to let them get away with it.
Right now, America is trying to change the rules in the gold and cryptocurrency markets. Remember how much debt they have, $35 trillion. Essentially, these are two alternative segments to the global currency market. Washington's actions in this direction clearly demonstrate one of America's main objectives. They are very eager to solve the problem of declining trust in the dollar. The U.S.
Hold on, pay really close attention. They're eager to solve the problem of the declining trust in the U.S. dollar. Just hold on to that for a second.
Just as it did in the 1930s and 1970s, will solve its financial problems at the expense of the entire world, driving everyone where? Into the cryptocurrency cloud. Over time, when part of the U.S. national debt is placed in stablecoins, the U.S. will devalue that debt. Once again, in simple terms, right now they have a $35 trillion currency debt. They move it into crypto, into the cloud, devalue it, and start from scratch. This is for those who really love dealing with crypto.
Okay.
Wow. It's mind blowing for him to disclose this about not only the U.S. debt, but how the Trump administration is going about it, and at the expense, as he said, at the expense of the rest of the world. So the rest of the world didn't push us into getting into this massive amount of debt. We created it ourselves. So why should we punish the rest of the world for it? It's a debt we acquired. We have to be responsible enough to pay it off or figure out something else.
Okay, well, so let's dive into the fundamental issues of this, because the first one really is that there is no indication that the United States is even trying to pay off this debt. Okay, so frankly, debt itself has been debt is how more or less the United States was created. I did a scripted show that is very, very interesting for you guys. And that is basically how the debt economy is what caused inflation. It's not money printing itself, because Japan also printed money and didn't have hyperinflation the way that the United States has had it. And it's not technically hyperinflation, but if you look at the amount that the dollar has been devalued over time, over the last 100 or so years, it is substantive. So what the United States is not looking at getting rid of the debt in a traditional sense. They're not looking to pay it off. Okay. And you can tell that because we add about $1 trillion in debt to our lovely deficit. We add about $1 trillion about every 100-ish days. So that means we are climbing in debt. And quite frankly, taxpayers are not able to pay off $37 trillion in debt. It's just not possible. So since that's not the case, what is the United States planning to do with it? Because the big problem that we're having right now is that other countries don't want to buy our treasuries. They don't want to buy our debt because we have so much of it compared to GDP, which Ray Dalio has been screaming from the rooftops. This is a really big problem. Countries like China, David, you talk about this all the time. China dumps our treasuries. They are dumping our debt as fast, more or less as fast as they reasonably can. So since people don't want our debt and they're not buying our debt and they're dumping our debt, how is the US going to acquire more and more and more debt? And this is what he's actually talking about.
Yeah, and that's very crucial for at least Americans to really grasp the significance of these developments, because their financial settings are tied to what's going on with the government policies and so forth. We all know how corrupted our government is. We're not going to get into all this. We know how it is. But this act like this, and what this advisor to the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, disclosed, because if we are to hypothetically notice that another country is doing this, you know what we're going to be saying? Oh, that's criminal. Oh, that's against the law. Oh, they are violating the law and so forth. And yet we are planning on doing it. And that is where the concern to me was, like the idea, it's like in your family. Are you going to be living beyond your means? I don't think so.
Well, so the United States, okay, so let's go back to two things that he actually said during his speech, because he said a couple of things that were really critical. The first one we just addressed, which is trust. The other countries fundamentally don't have trust in the US anymore. They don't trust the treasuries. Quite frankly, I don't know that the US is going to flat out default, but the higher and higher the debt goes, the more expensive it is to service that debt. So right now we have a massive amount of our tax revenue that is coming in to just service debt. That means that's money that doesn't go to roads. It doesn't go to infrastructure. It doesn't go to education. It doesn't go to teaching the next generation. So that's money that the United States can't even spend on military. They can't spend it on anything that they want to, because they have to service debt. So what's happened is that the higher the debt goes, the greater the yields they have to offer, which is interest that they have to offer. But that also means that's more interest they have to pay, making that debt burden even higher because of how much interest has to be paid back. Okay. Other countries, for a whole bunch of reasons, that is a reason. And then, David, you said it a couple years ago when the Ukraine conflict started, when Biden tried or seized Russian assets. The rest of the world was like, okay, well, I guess if you don't like us for some reason, you can seize our assets and then spend them for the other side. So the entire world saw that. And
that's, you know, you're right. And that's exactly where, for example, where Europe is headed. You know, with this so-called decoupling from the Russian energy, you know what is going to leave Europe with? Massive amount of cost for energy. And guess where they got in that from? The United States. So we charging them 5, 6, 7 times the prices of what they were getting from the Russians. So you're absolutely correct in this point. The idea is that when you think about all these changes that's taking place, it's not happening also in a vacuum, as we said. There are 3 other events that really coordinates with exactly what is happening as we speak about this particular topic. One of them has to do with the price of gold. When you consider gold, and I kept some pictures here. When you consider the price of gold, just the last 48 hours, it just went up by about almost 1.1%, which is usually, yes, it might be small margin of increase, but it's still substantive. You're looking at about getting closer to a $4,000 an ounce. And there are those who said few months ago, and I read some analysis by some financial analysts, that's all they do, the financial aspect. They were also speculating that the possibility of it reaching about $5,000 before the end of the year, meaning 2025, is a possibility. And this is exactly where you see where this is headed, where things are headed, and why all of a sudden the advisor to the Russian president decided to disclose this information. For us consumers, is worrisome. It's very worrisome when you start to realize the trust in the dollar it's going even faster. It's going down, and most countries have no interest in sort of trusting the dollar anymore.
Well, as you talk about gold, I would like to show two things.
Yeah.
And that is, let me show the first one. This right here, let me share the tab. And David, tell me if you know what this is.
Oh, under executive order of the president. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Bitcoin.
All right. So for those of you guys who don't know this, in the United States in the 1930s, the U.S. government confiscated people's gold. The average person. It now became illegal. You could be jailed, you could be fined for keeping gold. The only gold that was safe was gold that was in coin form, which now, if you see, there are a lot of gold coins. Most people own gold in the form of coins, and that is a direct throwback to what happened here. So under the executive order of the president, this was done. So the average person was holding their wealth in gold, right? Gold has stood the test of time. Gold is a safe asset. Well, according to the US government, it is not your asset to keep if they want it. So in the 1930s, there was a mass rounding up of people's wealth in the form of gold. Okay, so number one. The second thing that I want to show is this right here. Tell me, guys, if you know what this is.
Dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Okay, so that right there is Richard Nixon taking us off the gold standard. Okay, so but what does that mean? Why was that important? It's important in both of these two cases because the US government proved not only to its people that it could not that they could not be trusted with gold. And then when Richard Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, all of the countries that had gold in reserve status, all of a sudden it was no longer pegged, their dollars were no longer pegged to gold, which means they also were screwed on the back end of that. It wasn't just the average American that could no longer go and turn in their dollars for gold. It was other countries that held dollars as reserves. And so these are two cases in which the trust level, and the other part of that is the gold revaluation. So there are two things I really want to talk about with this, because there's the gold revaluation, but the gold revaluation is important because of the way that this stable coin situation is playing out. Because you could sit there and say, oh, you know, what is his name? Anton Kobiakov. Oh, you know, he is just, you know, trying to slander the United States, whatever. But yes, this lovely gentleman here, I don't know whether he's lovely or not. I've never met him. But so how the actual situation would play out, because it's not as simple as the United States being like, okay, I'm going to buy $37 trillion in Bitcoin and then devalue and dump it, right? It's not as easy as that. So what we just had passed, though, is the Genius Act. And the Genius Act it passed in July 18th of this year. It was signed by President Trump. And basically, it created payments in stable coins, and that they must be 100% backed by liquid assets. So either US dollars or US treasuries. Okay. So here's the thing about that. That is like low key selling treasuries. That's like selling treasuries in secret, right? Let's say other countries didn't want to buy treasuries. Okay, well, they're buying stable coins that are one-to-one backed by treasuries. That's basically other countries buying treasuries. Okay. Right now, the stablecoin situation is 1-to-1, one treasury, one to the stablecoin, right? Okay, well, what happens when all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of debt, because that's what it is, right? Is other countries are holding these stable coins. thinking that there's something really solid when they're backed to treasuries. And as we know, the treasuries keep on growing and growing as the US's hunger for debt gets even more voracious. Okay. What happens when it's no longer 1-to-1? What happens when the US revalues and it's 0.3-to-1, 0.1-to-1? And all of a sudden, what they thought they were holding in the stable coin, they thought they were holding 1-to-1 treasuries to stable coin. All of a sudden, that is halved or a quartered. And all of a sudden, that is massively devalued.
What's interesting? Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
no, go ahead.
Okay, so what I was going to say about it.
You're on a roll. You go ahead.
Because I believe this should be shouted from the rooftops. I really believe that if people understood ahead of time that Nixon was going to take the dollar off the gold standard, and then, okay, so here's the next part of it, is revalued gold.
Yeah.
So we have revalues of gold throughout US history. Yes. That lovely substance. Okay. So in the 1930s, when the gold was taken away from the people, okay, so this was massive wealth that the people held. It was taken away from the people and then it was revalued.
Yeah.
So let me pull up the numbers for the revalue because this absolutely insanity. Okay, here it is. So gold, so the official gold price was $20.67 an ounce. Okay. So Franklin Roosevelt was like, nope, sorry guys. All your gold belongs to us.
Yeah.
Just kidding. You thought it was yours, but it's not, it's ours. Okay. And in 1934, okay, so 1933 is when President Roosevelt said, hey, all your gold belongs to us except for coins. Sorry. In 1934, okay, in 1934, the Gold Reserve Act officially revalued gold from $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce.
Yeah.
That is a 69% devaluation of gold against the dollar.
The dollar. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the government now has all of this gold. Guys, I'm getting real heated because this is really... It really makes me angry, okay? So all of a sudden, all of this wealth was taken away from the American population and then revalued, so it's even more that the government has. It drives me freaking bananas. And David, what is the gold price today?
It's 3,790.
Okay.
So
in less than 100 years.
Yeah, they're expecting it to reach about 5,000 by the end of the year. What I was going to say is the clip you played about Nixon, that first sentence. I directed Secretary Treasury Donnelly to, that is the key word, to temporarily.
Yeah. Don't worry, inflation is transitory.
Yeah, the same thing. That's also emphasized the idea of how much you cannot trust the government of what they are doing and what they're saying. So what Trump is moving away with all this, and this brings me back to my other 2 points I was going to talk about. I talked about the gold going up, and I also talk about the dollar going down. And this one has to do with the dollar went down by almost 11% since Donald Trump came to power. Well, so in other words, for people now, here's the simple language to that, is that an average family, we need now about 11% increase in their income to make ends meet based on what they used to be. So the value of the dollar is going down as the gold going up, and all this at the same time when Anton Kabiakov disclosed what the intentions of the US is doing. And to understand how corrupted our system, I'm going to share a picture with you guys right here. Tell me, what do you see on the background? You see those two pictures right here. That's Donald Trump, right? That's
Trump card.
Trump card. It shows you how much even the White House is for sale. Trump was always about Trump. It's about enriching himself and his family. So to go at it at this way, by, because what it's going to do to an average citizen? The money we have, it will become, it's almost like what happened in Germany back then. They got so much money, but it's useless. It's worthless. It's exactly, if we go that route, we live in beyond our means. We're spending this massive amount of money on military bases, on stuff that have nothing to do with the welfare of average citizens. And yet, you want to dump it on the rest of the world? I don't think so.
Well, and exactly what you just said, David, dumping it on the rest of the world. That's the accusation that was made, right? That's the accusation that Kobiakov made, is that more or less the United States is dumping this on the rest of the world. So for people who are saying, oh no, this is never going to happen, this is never going to happen, David, I would like to share this clip because it's basically talking about Scott Bessent talking about doing this exact thing.
I heard that.
So let's listen in.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is positioning the stablecoin industry as a potential solution to the country's mounting debt financing needs. Now, he anticipates that digital currency issuers could become major buyers of the government securities. Now, the U.S. Treasury chief has been in talks with major stablecoin companies, including Tether and Circle, about their treasury holdings. He views the sector as a growing source of demand for short-term government debt. Now, these discussions have influenced the department's strategy to emphasize bill issuance over longer-term securities. Stablecoins are pledged to the dollar to maintain dollar peg. The issuers of stablecoins have to hold reserves of safe assets like treasury bills. Currently, the stablecoin market is about $250 billion. Now, Bessent expects.
Okay, so in case you were thinking this was conspiracy and this was just one Russian diplomat saying this, it is not. That's not in fact true.
That is
This
true.
is not conspiracy. This is something that is underway. And David, you're absolutely right. I think the big issue with doing anything other than, now, granted, I don't know what the solution is to $37 trillion in debt. What I can tell you is that, after doing kind of a really deep dive into Japan's deflation versus the US's inflation, I think the fundamental issue actually comes back to the central banks, because the United States, the reason that we're in the situation that we're in is because everything is financialized, right? When you buy a house, what do? You go get a giant mortgage. A mortgage, and David, you speak French as well. Mort means
the death.
Death, right? You are supposed to keep it until you die. It is something you are supposed to pay until you die. It's a mortgage.
Yeah.
So
mortgage.
this is, you are in debt until you die, paying for the place that you live. And an average mortgage is about 30 years. And if you look at life expectancy, which unfortunately in the United States is going down, is dropping massively, people will primarily be paying on their mortgage for the rest of their life. But that is a financialized thing. Look at cars. What do people do? You go buy a car, or you go get a car loan to be able to afford a car. University. Do you pay for university out of pocket, or do you go get a student loan? And these are massive, massive loans. And so basically everything in an American's life is built around debt. Every major thing that you have. And quite frankly, I mean, having just gotten married, I did not use debt to do it, but having just gotten married, weddings are ridiculously expensive. And what did most people do? They go get a loan. So every major step in a person's life is financialized. It is driven by debt. And so you can't be surprised when basically all of this money printing comes down to the average person to spend, because the central banks are giving it to the lending banks. The lending banks are lending it out, and people are spending it in the real economy. And so inflation is out of control in the real economy. Like, don't talk to me about the freaking government numbers. Don't talk to me about their 2%, their 3%. Don't talk to me about that, because I go grocery shopping, right? I know how expensive a house is. And if you live in the real economy, which all of us do, things are getting more and more expensive because of this kicking the can down the road. And so this is just like a hidden secret way, basically, that's not so secret because Scott Besson is talking about it.
Yeah. And at the same at the same time, we are giving money to other countries. You know, I'll give the two examples, especially for Israel. We're giving the money, and Israel is using that money for having free healthcare and free education.
Right.
So that's, to me, it's a problematic. Yeah, we don't have here. So that's why Americans gets always distracted by other issues and there, and the government is going into the corruption part of it. So that's, to me, highlighted the much bigger picture, and the much bigger picture, which some at least starting to ask the fundamental questions regarding the viability of the system itself, the efficiency of the system. And I've started to hear conversation with people in the know. An average Joe, average Jane ain't gonna be worrying about this. I'm not putting down anybody here, but I'm talking about people who are in the know, in understanding how the dynamics work. They start to ask now the question about the system in itself. Is it viable? When they are seeing what's going on in some other countries. And this is one of the reasons why, in the case of, and I will bring up China's conversation, because I'm going to bring something about China and gold in a minute here. But this is why one of the key aspects why you have a recent delegation from Congress went to China. It didn't go in China because Trump asked them. As a matter of fact, Trump butted head with them. He didn't want them to go. The reason we went to China, it's because we are realizing there is no other way but either cooperate, because it's not gonna solve itself. And China holds the cards. And this is one of the key. And speaking of China, I want to bring up the third point about what I talked earlier. One has to do with price of gold. Second one has to do with the US going down. And the third one has to do with China. The banks, the China Central Bank now, sort of what are they doing is they are encouraging other countries to deposit their golds in China. You know, Joanna, I think, did a video way back when we talked about China amassing gold. It is for a reason. I do not, and this, I'll bet on it. Usually I don't bet, but I'll bet on this. I bet China will not, and I'm not saying it to be Mr. Nice, I'm saying it based on facts. I bet you China will not behave like the United States. In other words, if countries deposit their golds, China will not say, oh, it's ours now. It's like what we're doing now to Germany, what we're doing to other countries. UK is doing it to Venezuela and India, because the gold in the central bank in England doesn't belong to England. It belongs to Venezuela and it belongs to India. So the US now, the Germans, they can't do anything about the gold here. Saudis can't do anything about the gold. And I saw it with my own eyes. I saw the amount of the equivalency of $21 billion worth of gold bars in the vault. I went down, I was allowed to go, and I saw. So to me, if China moving into this direction, that's, to me, it's a strategic thinking. That means one thing. They are convinced about the value of the dollar, it's going to go down. That's the only explanation I have. China has no intentions of controlling the gold from other countries and so forth. No. It's the idea of how this is going to pave the way. Sort of, you think about, yes, will it sort of boost the value of the renminbi on the international stage? Of course it will. So, but at the same time, it's not because it wants to turn its currency into a global reserve currency. China's never had the intentions of that. I asked people in the know. And I was told there is no interest of Chinese government into that.
Well, David, you make a really good point because, quite frankly, there is no question that the dollar is being devalued nonstop. That's not it, that's not even an argument, right? I think as a country, you would have to be absolutely blind to not see that that's happening. Even as an average person, you'd have to be absolutely blind to see that that's not happening. The dollar is and it has been for a long time. This isn't new. I mean, we were discussing gold a little bit earlier, but this isn't the first time that the United States has devalued the currency. It's been happening for a century, probably more than a century at this point. Because what we're looking at with price of gold, even and price of assets, what we're looking at is the inflated price of assets, right? So it's, you could buy a house for, $5,000. My dad and I were talking about the first house that he bought. So he bought a house for $15,000. Okay.
Wow.
Now this was in the 70s. But he bought a house way for $15,000. There is no way you can buy a house right now for $15,000. You can't even buy a tear down house. I'm not even sure you could buy a piece of land. I mean, maybe somewhere, okay, maybe out in the middle of nowhere, you can buy a piece of land for $15,000, but you can't even buy a new car for $15,000. You can't buy anything really for $15,000. Okay. But that's not because $15,000 was $15,000 back then was worth approximately, because years and in all of this stuff, but it was approximately worth basically what a house is right now, right? Which I think this is more than I think inflation, because I think the average house I think is like $400,000, but let's say a starter home is $300,000 in most markets, right? So it's that the dollar was devalued to the extent that now for the same asset you're paying $300,000, because $15,000 of buying power back then is the same as $300,000 of buying power right now. And so it's not that it's the same $15,000 in terms of purchasing power that we have for $15,000 right now. And a lot of people don't think of it that way, but it is that way. It's that the dollar was so devalued that right now everything is ridiculously expensive. The other side of that coin is that, for example, a house used to be 3 to 5 times annual income, and now it's like 7 to 10 times annual income. So incomes have not risen at the same rate that the devaluation of the dollar has risen, that the cost of assets have risen. And so that is the fundamental problem. That $15,000 that my dad paid for that house is not the same $15,000 we have right now, because it doesn't purchase the same amount of stuff. And as a simple explanation of this, if you have a dollar and the entire world has to, whatever they take, whatever they borrow, let's say a country borrows 10 cents. They have to pay that back, because that's all that there is you have this $1. Okay. But if you are in the United States position, or any country that has reserve currency, you can print another dollar. So let's say you loan that dollar out, the original dollar, somebody pays it back, but all of a sudden now you have $2. So you have more money that comes into the environment. And it's not competing for more goods and services. The goods and services are the same. You have the same number of goods and services, but now you have twice the amount of money to pay for it. What's going to happen is all of a sudden there's price competition, because there's more money in the system. And so now you have more money going for the exact same goods and services. So what's going to happen? The price of things is going to increase.
But at least there's one thing you can buy with 15,000.
What?
BYD.
Yes, that's lovely. Unfortunately, we don't have that here in the United States.
I looked at the prices in China. $15,000 will buy you a nice, efficient, reliable, technologically advanced BYD. And this is one of the reasons, just for our American audience here to understand why the US went ahead and put those high walls against the Chinese EVs, because most Americans will buy the Chinese vehicles because they are efficient and
Oh, yeah.
affordable. And affordable.
Unquestionably.
I've seen cars, not to be talking about cars here, but I've seen cars in my last trip, you know, a high end, cost about 40 grand. So, as a matter of fact, yesterday I posted for the community, BYD developed now a car that can challenge Bugatti.
Wow.
Yes, I shared the picture with, that's an EV. That just shows you where things are. So 15,000, you still can buy a BYD. But on a serious note, yeah, you
not here.
Yeah, unfortunately. So, and just for you, for the community to know, you know, when Elizabeth was 14 years old, she participated in an investment competition here in the state of Texas, and she was ranked the 3rd. So
Thank
just
you.
FYI,
Not,
to know.
not blushing.
Way back. Well, no, it's worth mentioning. So
Well,
this
thank
way
you.
people understand, you know, where are you coming from regarding this conversation on the financial aspects of it.
Yeah, my degree is in global business.
Yeah,
And
so
if
you-
right
and
now
you've been in China, you've been in
I
South
have,
Korea, you visited, you know, I wish you could have gone
India.
next time. Maybe next time you come with me, I'll ask your husband for permission to come with me to China. So,
Well, I'm sure
but
that
China
would be
has
wonderful.
changed. China has changed big time. You know, you know what was the first question I was asked when I got back? Especially after, because they found out that I was in Beijing. You know, as they said, was the air cleared in Beijing?
Yeah.
It was a blue sky. Looks like the Chinese got on it from a few years ago.
Good.
Lit it up. It was incredible.
Good.
It was incredible. So I truly enjoyed it. So
Well,
just, yeah,
go
go ahead. I was going to say, just to go back to our topic, the idea of why is this important? It is important for at least American audience here. I know for you, even in other parts of the world, you need to be aware of where things are headed. Yeah, it's not fair, it's not right for us to dump our debt on the rest of the world. The rest of the world didn't acquire it, we did. So we'll pay. But on the other hand, even Americans themselves, you know, the like us, we are just average people. You know, it's not like we are these millionaires, we're just average people. You know, just we kind of handle the finances differently, slightly than an average citizen here. But they have the right to at least understand what's going on, because at some point, and it's getting there, they're going to end up with nothing. Whatever money they have, it's not worth much. They cannot afford to buy basics. And when you start having people wondering about, you know, just the basics, having a hard time to meet those, to finance those kind of necessities, we all know where this is going to lead to. And apparently where the country is headed with the failed and ill-conceived policies of the current administration, or any administration for that matter. I'm not saying the Democrats are better. No, both two faces of the same coin. They are worse, both of them. So the system, in my opinion, this is why I had some conversation with some people, and they start to really point out the direction, the conversation into the direction of the viability of the system in itself. Is the system failing? And maybe time to start reconsidering.
So, David, I watched a video the other day, and I've brought this video up a couple of times because it's just, it's flat out true, right? The system isn't broken for everyone.
No.
The system is broken disproportionately for the 99%.
That's true.
The people at the top, Elon Musk looks like he's doing just fine. He does not look like he and the rest of the elites, quite frankly, even Donald Trump, they look like they're doing just fine. I think I saw an article. I wonder if I can find it again, but it's basically like the Trumps, I don't know, made like $5 billion off crypto or something like that, right? Guys, if you can find the link to the article, stick it in the chat. But they're doing just fine. So the system is not broken equally across all demographics of people, right? It's doing great for the people who are in power, who are the ones who put and keep the system in place. Yeah. The rest of us financial literacy is abysmal, and not just in this country, around the world, financial literacy is abysmal. People don't know anything about money. They don't know how it works. And David, you were talking about this whole stable coin thing and, you know, how it's going to affect the average citizen. I think it was even in that news article they were talking, or the Wyon thing. I think that's where it was. But they were talking about how the average U.S. citizen is going to be the one holding the stable coin, right?
Yeah.
So some amount of countries are going to hold them. Although, quite frankly, like you saw this Russian diplomat, he basically was like, guys, don't buy these.
Yeah.
Kobiakov was like, this is what's happening. Don't buy these. You're basically buying treasuries. And the US is going to use this to push to sell more debt, right?
Yeah.
It's the average person that's going to be like, oh, it's safe. And I'm not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice.
No,
This is
no, no,
just my
no.
opinion, right? It's just an opinion of some random person, some girl in the world, right? But they said it is that it's going to be the average person that holds these. And so it doesn't mean that it's like necessarily a bad investment. I'm sure people are going to, you know, come back and be like, no, stablecoin's like a great investment. I do think it's possible that it is a backdoor as a central bank digital currency, which we did a show on, where we'll do a whole other show basically on how stablecoin really is a central bank digital currency and backdoor to control and all of that stuff. But if you're just looking at it in terms of value, I think there's a real question there.
Yeah. That's why the Europeans are pushing for it. So let me say thank you quickly here to Rafael.
Oh,
Here's
hey,
what he
Rafael.
wrote. Hello, my beautiful people. She is on fire. She is indeed.
This makes me angry.
Yeah. Rafael, thank you so much for your continued support.
Thank you.
Man. Pay attention to the also Russia and China says Bitcoin is a scam. They will not allow the US to get rid of that way. No way. And that's true. That's correct, Rafael. Why should the US get off the hook per se? Yeah, I'm an American, and I'm, you know, would it be nice not to have the debt? But again, you know, at the same time, we got ourselves into all this mess. We've been getting ourselves into this mess.
Right, but that's not the problem. The problem so yes, that's definitely true. I'm not arguing that that's true.
Yeah.
It is, okay? But that's not the problem. The problem is who owns this debt, because it's not just the US's problem. The fact that
there are other countries involved as well. But at the same time, when you look at, for example, we spending, at least to my knowledge, during my days in DC, where, you know, we'll have a conversation about the payments of the interest on the debt. And at that time, I recall, it was about $750 billion.
It's more than that now.
Yeah, I'm sure. And the idea is sort of like a common sense. Well, if you are spending more than you are earning, the common sense to do is you're going to have to rethink your spending habits. So, and that applies to the government as well. When we go and send money right and left to corrupted governments and expend more military bases around the world and all that stuff costs money. You know, where that money is coming from? There's taxpayers that,
it's printing money. I mean, it's taxpayer, but it's like printing money, and it's more debt, right? So I am certain the debt is being used to pay debt at this point.
Till when?
Well, but that's what I'm saying is if the US were to default on its debt, which I don't think is going to happen, okay? But even if the US inflates its debt away, which is an equally bad problem, okay? It's just spread over time. Instead of like if the US defaulted on its debt or any part of its debt, that would be okay, right now this is like a really big problem. But if the US inflates its debt away, which is what it is doing, that is what is happening. Whether the US is doing it on purpose or not, that is what's happening, okay? And it's being called out across the world that that's what's happening. But the problem is that other countries are tied to this debt. Other countries and a lot of developing nations hold this debt to the extent that they are more or less living on or gaining profit from the interest payments they're receiving off of this debt. A lot of currencies around the world are still tied to the US dollar. And as inflation rises, it becomes a bigger and bigger problem for those countries. And so this isn't just a United States problem. And I think that that's what Kobiakov is talking about, is it's at the expense of the rest of the world. So this is a really, really big problem. And that's why it makes me so angry, is because people really need to be paying attention to the way that this debt is being handled, because it isn't just the United States. It's not just the American people who are going to suffer for it. It is a lot of the rest of the world. So it's why it gets me all fired up, and why I think people should really pay attention to how this is being handled. And my hope actually is, because a lot of other YouTubers have been talking about this, some news sources, whatever, I think it should be screamed from the rooftops that this is a very real possibility. And especially with the Genius Act, especially with that, because you could say, oh no, there's no way, they're not going to do it, whatever. But number one, it makes sense to do. If you're in that position, it makes sense to do this. But then now we have the Genius Act. We have Scott Bessent coming out and more or less saying this. Okay, so fine. But as a population, keep your eyes wide open. I'm not telling you what to do. I don't know what to do. But I'm telling you, pay attention to this so that you can choose whether you want to buy into it or not. And I'm sure that this story will unfold over years and years and years. So just pay attention. Like I said, I don't have any answers. But I do know that the only way to find a solution is to be paying attention, to have your eyes open, and be looking at the situation the way that it is, not the way you may want it to be.
And that is one of the, also just while I'm thinking about it, because usually when things happen like this, the government data and stats, usually when the Labor Department will release the job employment numbers, the consumer index numbers, and so forth, the first thing that's going to come to, at least to some of us, is, can we trust those numbers? Can we trust what no. It becomes clear. It becomes clear what they're going to be saying as far as the job numbers, the consumer spending. It's going great. The economy is expanding, and when in reality, it doesn't reflect when you go to grocery stores. It doesn't reflect when you see the prices of items where they are, and it's even more harder for people on a fixed income.
Absolutely.
That's to me, it's, I really feel for the elderly, especially those on retirements. You kind of, they can't, you're on a fixed income, and you realize year after year the value of that dollar is going down. What you used to buy the last year, you might not be able to afford it this year. So, and to me, retired people shouldn't be in that position. Shame on our government.
They shouldn't be, but here's the thing, okay? I did, guys, I'm going to put this link in the description, and this is a show I did a deep dive on. Is the US currently in a recession? Like, are we in a recession now? And a lot of the numbers more or less signal that. So if you want to check it out, please check out that video. It's very, very interesting. But number one, David, you're absolutely right. We can't trust the jobs numbers. They have been so unbelievable. It's not even a little bit inflated. They have been like ridiculously out of this world inflated. So number one, you absolutely cannot trust it. But I will tell you this, there is nothing riskier in this country than being poor or being broke or being on a fixed income. I hate that it's that way, because the people that are the most vulnerable are the ones who are getting it the worst. And I think that's part of what really inspired me to do this channel the way that we've changed it into more of an economics based or finance based, is because there is nothing riskier than being broke here. There is nothing riskier than being poor, because nobody cares. They don't care. The government doesn't care. They don't care if you can't afford groceries. Part of this video that I did is actually on the rise of buy now, pay later. So buy now, pay later, which is companies like Klarna, Afterpay, these aren't being used for luxuries. They're being used for groceries. So that means you can take your grocery bill and you can split it into 4 different payments or 6 different payments. if you can't afford your groceries. Now, the problem with that is that 40% of people have paid a payment late. And so they get hit with all kinds of fees. They get hit with interest charge. They get hit with all of these things. So all of a sudden, their $300 grocery bill for their family is now $400 or $500 for the same groceries. But the fact that people in this country are using buy now, pay later for groceries is an extreme sign.
Yeah.
And nobody cares, right? Nobody, the government's not sitting there like, oh, we should do something about grocery bills.
They're corrupted. So, and this is exactly why I had to mention earlier the idea of the system. It's because what it highlights, and again, when I do comparison, I'm doing comparison because of the facts. And I'll go back to China because I was there. I saw, I asked people, when luckily you can translate few things on the phone and communicate with someone who doesn't speak English, or with someone I don't speak his or her language. And they all were kind enough to talk and ask. And I usually ask basic questions, do you have any economic problem? This like, what do you mean? And I was like, can you afford to buy XYZ? They said, yeah, we don't have problem. I said, do you go hungry in a day? He said, no way. And all that, you kind of course, on a basic level, you get with some people well-educated, highly educated, and so forth. You're going to ask at a higher level as far as how do you see the system, And the one thing that I came to conclusion regarding just this basic conversation, I wasn't conducting interviews, it's just a basic conversation, is that when I compare our system to what the Chinese doing, the one thing that is missing for us is the centrality. We don't have a central sort of system that can work on all directions on behalf of everybody. And that is where I see the difference. And that's what brought me back to mention the idea of the system in itself. And some people here in this country are now asking the question.
What question?
The question is our system flawed and broken? We need to reconsider a different approach or a different system. I'm not saying we need
absolutely.
Not to adopt the Chinese system because Chinese system works for the Chinese.
Right.
But when you look at the result of that central planning per se, which we don't have because we have, a massive corruption inside the government. The results speaks for themselves on both ends. On the other end, you see where the development of infrastructure, you see when everybody's happy walking. I walked around. I lost about 10 pounds just from walking, believe it or not. Because, I'm not going to stay indoor. The whole idea, you go there to learn. And I walk around and I didn't see homeless people. I didn't see addicts in the street, sleeping in the street. Everybody's relaxed, happy, relaxing, moving about their day. No issues there whatsoever. And I ask myself, are their needs being met? And if they are, who's contributing to that and how so? Because that is, to me, the burning question of why can't we have something similar to that?
Well, so here's this is my opinion. This is the opinion of one girl in the world, okay? But my opinion of that is, first of all, it is beyond disgusting that the United States has people, the richest country in the world, has 1 in 4 children that don't have food when they go home from school, okay? Sure. It is disgusting and beyond, it is beyond hypocritical, okay? Let me preface it with that. But it doesn't matter who's in power, because this is the case, whether it is Republican or Democrat or whatever. This has just been the system, okay? That if you go look at a homeless person, right? They're all over the place. And they're gaining, there's more and more of them, okay? They're big tent cities. It's awful. But there have been homeless people as long as I've been alive, okay? That is ridiculous. But the average person looks at that homeless person and says, I don't want to be that. They look at the poor and say, I don't want to be that. So I'm going to stay in my job. I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm not going to rock the boat too much because whoever that is that's looking at that person thinks that they could be them. It is a subconscious control mechanism. That is flat out my opinion, is that you can look at somebody you don't want to be, and you will stay in a job you don't like. You will work yourself to death. You will take out loans to not become that.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there is a better control mechanism, honestly, than keeping the poor in very plain sight. That is my personal opinion on it. Looking at the struggles of people, the government does not care. And I can tell they don't care because of how many people are struggling. If the government cared that people were struggling, they wouldn't be.
Yeah.
And so flat out, I believe my opinion, one girl in the world, is that it is a flat out control mechanism. The elites are like, all right, if you guys jump out of line, you might become that. And it keeps people keeping themselves in the system. Because if we all took a look at the system and we said, you know what, this isn't really the system that I want to live in. I don't want to work myself until I'm 65 years old, live in terrible health for another 10 years maybe, and then die without having ever enjoyed my life. I don't think any of us would have signed up for that. If anybody had said, as you were leaving high school, hey, do you want to do this? Everyone would have said no. But that's what the reality is becoming. That's what the reality is for most people. And you can't keep them in line without having something worse than that right in front of their faces all the time. So that's just my theory. I'm not really, I don't know.
It's the reality. It's reflected through what's going on, for example, in California. You look at San Francisco now. San Francisco spends about $100 million a year on homelessness.
Why are they still homeless?
And they're still in the streets. So I've seen tents in the massive area. New York is that. Some locations I drive at night sometimes, even when I am here in Texas and Dallas. You drive certain areas. It's not as bad as it is in California and New York. But it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be in this country. You know, when I was coming back from China, my flight got delayed and so forth. Anyway, I got to LA. I wasn't supposed to be in LA because I had to get a connecting flight. And I said to myself, you know, the next flight was till about midnight, you know. So I had to almost stay. Luckily, I was lucky. One lady helped me from the American airline counter, and she got me on an earlier flight. So I got there at 3, and I had to wait till 11 p.m. And I said to myself, why don't we have speed train? And if it were one, I'll just hop on one from LA and head it back home.
Yeah.
We don't. I looked at the distance I crossed from Shanghai to Beijing. 4 hours, you know, 349 kilometers an hour, on time, as comfortable as it gets. I even snapped a picture, and I'll share it next time. Snapped a picture of water. I put water on the tray at that speed. The cup didn't move.
No Jurassic Park.
That's how smooth the ride was. And the comfort of it. You know, I didn't go business class. I didn't need to go business class. I didn't go first class. I didn't need to go first class. I went second class like everybody else. And the second class is like an airplane. The comfort of it. And I'm like wondering, you know, how hard was it for us to build something like this, to connect two cities? That makes you wonder why people are so happy, because they are less stressed about, I have to get to the airport, I have to go through security, the gas, the insurance, car insurance, and so forth. I'll hop on a train. The rail system in China, you won't believe it, Elizabeth. I hope you get a chance to go. You know, I know you went back then a few years ago.
Yeah.
Things completely different. And they are working now on a train that's going to reach almost 1,000 kilometers an hour. Just think about it. You cross the entire China from the east to the west just by train.
Well, like, look, don't get me wrong here, because something in the universe, please give us a speed train here. It's so much easier. I really enjoy speed trains. Please, auto lobby, can you just let it happen?
Yeah.
Can you just let us have a speed train? Please give the plebes a speed train.
No.
Okay, but that aside, the United States and China are at very different stages in development. Okay, the United States could have not gone the way of the cycle. The United States could have gone a different direction than every other empire that came before it. Okay, it could have, but it didn't.
Yeah.
It went the way of the British Empire. It went the way of the Dutch, of the French. It went the way of all empires, which is the United States at one point was doing all these exciting things. The United States after World War II was booming, right?
Yeah.
It was a booming economy. It was a place where infrastructure was being built. In fact, a lot of our infrastructure is from back then, right? When all this infrastructure was being built. And it was so exciting. And it was all of the new cool things. And then it went the way of the cycle of empires. And China has a choice. They have a choice as to whether they're going to just keep going up and do it right, or are they too going to go the way of the empire? But I don't think it's fair to put the United States with China at this point, because China is on its way up and the US is on its way down. And so it's not in the same place in its empire cycle. And I wish it freaking was. I wish the US had done a lot of history different. And I wish that right now we had speed trains and we had flying cars and all the things that people were so excited about. There is a freaking Tesla coil on I-35. I think it's on I-35 on the way to Austin, I think, or Houston. And it's just sitting out there in a field, right? We could have had, and it went bankrupt. Well, that's a real thing, guys. Look it up in Texas. I think it's on I-35 somewhere along the highway to Austin. But like, we could have had all the exciting things that people were just over the moon about.
Yeah.
And China is having those things right now because they're on their way up. It's undeniable, whether you like China or don't, or think that China's evil or China is the savior. It doesn't matter. China is on its way up and the US is on its way down.
Yeah.
And so the US has a choice right now. Can we pick this ship back up and go in a good direction, or are we going to go the way of the British Empire? Most people are freaking thrilled the British Empire ended. And quite frankly, the rest of the world, if you are American watching this and don't know this, most of the rest of the world is thrilled that the US empire is ending.
Going down. Yeah. Yeah, we abused it. We abused power beyond.
Well, so did the Brits, though, before us.
Well, that's why that's why the outcome was the outcomes. I mean,
the Romans before us.
Ask anybody outside about the British, they'll tell you, it's not liked. The whole Brit for even the current policies for coming out of the Downing streets, it just, we used to deal with them, to work with them back in DC or whatever. I mean, it's kind of like they're cunning. It's just the history repeats itself in a way. So you're right. Most of other people around the world, will be thrilled that the US is down, is because we've caused havoc. We have not had the good intentions of cooperating with the rest of the world for the sake of humanity. For the sake of humanity. I understand about, progress. I understand about succeeding. I understand about benefiting from that. But how about that concept of live and let live? We don't want that. We want everything for us. Hell with the rest. And that's not a way of existing. And that is more and more is becoming evident now that the system flawed, corruption is massive, and only American people can either take a stand, fix it, or we just keep kicking the can down the road. And that's what you are noticing right now by having the brains in America are leaving quietly. People are moving. I'm aware of some really sort of top academicians are moving. I have names, and my dear friend, Dr. Fang, that I talked to him about all this. He was in academia and so forth, and the brain drains that is going on in
Yeah.
America is unbelievable. The government is staying quiet about it. And
Well, I mean, of course.
it's the reality of it. I mean, the latest one is this particular gentleman. His name is Sang Chan Shu. One of the top. Listen to this. One of the top AI guy in the United States. No longer. He just left and got a position at Tsinghua University in Beijing, one of the top in the country. If you only read the history of Mr. Sang, or Dr. Sang, that is, he's in computer science and genius, almost 30 years at UCLA working on developing the AI models and so way before its time right now. And he just made a decision 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. Said, I'm done. You're seeing that brain drain. Academicians, they are now, I'm aware of even professors right here in the US are reaching out to some Chinese institutions. So because we are seeing where this is going. And, you can either make a decision, you can complain all you want, and complaining ain't gonna get you anywhere. Or make a decision as to what you want. You want to stay, you stay quiet. You want to make a change, make a change. Simple as that. So, and but again, I go back to my point, and that's my last point here. I go back to the point of the system. I tell you, Elizabeth, I had conversation with people in the know. The questions now centers around the efficiency or lack of the system in itself. Forget about corruption, forget about the failed policies, forget all that. That's part of the problem. The key question they're asking now is the system.
Well, the system has been broken for a long time. It may have, I mean, I know people are really obsessed with the Constitution, but our government flat out has not upheld the Constitution.
No, I used to teach those courses, and when I explained to the students that don't get on high horse by thinking that the founding fathers were this saint. No, the founding fathers were part of the problem because there's the one who set up the system the way it is. Who do you think used to be elected for the Senate? It was the founding fathers who used to be the bankers, the landowners, the farmers, who used the one to pick who's going to become a senator in return for you ensure the policies that are enacted are in my favor. The founding fathers have no. Most Americans are delusional about, the great founding father. No. The system was corrupted from its inception. The beginning. If we had a system where, for example, you got a president that got in a lie or did something against the law, why wait till he or she finishes the term? No. You put the guy in trial, figure out what was issues, and issue the punishment, whatever the punishment. You got a member of government get involved in corruption and get caught. You don't have to get caught. The facts you're thinking about corruption, you don't wait for 3 or 4 or 5 year investigation. You take the guy, prove, give the guy a fair trial, put the evidence on the table, and conduct the punishment. And you all know what my punishment is. I'm not going to say it. So I won't say it. Because to me, that's how it is. That's how it is. You don't, because now we are in a position where we have to decide. When you have a house that has a lot of cracks, what do? You take it down and you rebuild. That's where we are.
Well, unfortunately, I think that taking it down and rebuilding part is not pleasant for most empires. Not all, but most empires that it happens to. I think the dismantling is very unpleasant.
Sometimes you have to go through pain to make change. That's the only way.
Well, I think even if that is the case, I think it needs to very much be considered what would we change into? Because like you said, the founding fathers, right? So the United States gained its independence from Great Britain. Okay. So in a sense, we made a big decolonialization choice.
Yeah.
Okay. Most countries, right? Their independence, the joke is that a lot of countries' independence days from Great Britain, right? So the United States also where did we get our independence from, right? We got our independence from a corrupt empire.
Yeah.
Because colonialization was awful.
Oh, it was horrendous.
So, and most countries in the world would agree, but the United States was one of those colonies.
Yeah.
And that gained its own freedom, that gained the opportunity to do things differently than the people who were holding them down, than the system. But what did the founding fathers do? They created this beautiful nation that we live in that during many parts of its history was wonderful. But it set up something that you alluded to because it did a lot right, okay? I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it was terrible. It was not. It did a lot right. But what it did was set up elites in power the same way that we have right now. Because what it was landowners, it was bankers, it was the elites of the population at that time. And yes, it's not kings and queens, bless, but yes, it's not kings and queens, but we do have our own ruling class. And that just comes with wealth instead of a title, which the title of king and queen didn't really hold any power if it didn't have wealth behind it either. So we have a different structure for elites to rule everything. And then and this is my opinion, guys, but this is a psyop that everyone here in the United States, at least from my generation, the millennials on, was get wealthy enough to transcend the problems of society. But when everyone is trying to get wealthy, no one's trying to fix the problems.
They become part of it.
Right. When everyone is trying to get wealthy enough to not have to deal with the problems, no one is fixing them. And so everyone, and you know, it was funny. I kept this story for years and years, but I was 26 years old and it was my birthday and I walked into a bank. I was like depositing a check or something. And the girl behind the counter, we were talking about like, oh, you know, I can't believe I'm a failure. I'm not a multimillionaire at age 26. Okay. And the girl behind the counter was like, oh my God, me too. She was like, I just turned 24 and I thought I'd be a millionaire by now. And she's working at a teller bank, which is a good job. But neither of us were multimillionaires by the point we thought we would be, because everyone was told to go be wealthy. Now, there's nothing wrong with being wealthy. I want you guys to be wealthy. I want you to be wealthy. But the point is that if everyone is trying to get out of the system, no one is dealing with the problems of the system. And you can distract entire generations of people away from the problems of the system that exists because everyone's just trying to jump ship until you get further down the line and realize it's a lot harder to jump ship than you think it's going to be when you're young. And
but on that note, we're gonna leave it at that. So
David,
so,
I'm on a tangent.
I know, but unless you want to keep going, you can.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Hang on. I will do this next time when I'm there. So
cool. Follow me.